The story of the main character began with the fact that his father at some point ordered him to leave their home and become the ruler of Oberstein. Of course, for the guy it was quite unexpected, but he had to agree with his father's decision. Thus, the guy found himself in the kingdom of the Big Balog of the territory of Oberstein and noticed that there was nothing at all. The main character's name was Ashto and he was a mage. After looking around, the guy decided that he needed to find water and a place to sleep and make sure he was safe. The first thing to do was to look for a source of water. Ashto took out his magic wand and used search magic. After a while, he was fortunate, for there was a river nearby. After going down to the river, the hero decided that now he had to find a place to rest, besides he had no food. But food could wait until tomorrow. In any case, he still had a supply of food for a while. Ashto decided to move a little away from the river as it was quite dangerous to stand close to it. Hearing some noise, the hero raised his head and noticed that birds were circling above him. The boy looked around and noticed different kinds of animals, from squirrels to beautiful starlings. Ashto laughed sarcastically and thought he had been made ruler of this fucking forest. The greatest kingdom on the continent was the Great Balog, and the protagonist was the second son of the strongest royal military family and a major noble house of the Asteria family. His older brother named Ledger was known as the Thunder Emperor and as his father. He was a military commander, however he was the youngest commander in history. He also had a younger sister named Sherry, who attained the status of the strongest mage in the kingdom just a year after joining the military. Through his efforts, his brother became an unrivaled warrior and could be proud of his strength and electricity magic. His sister, on the other hand, was born with more mana than anyone in history and wielded Lud magic. Ashto's parents were proud of them, and the protagonist was proud to be their brother. But in Ashto's case, his magic was quite different. He possessed the magic of nature and was quite surprised to learn about it. Unlike his sister and brother, his life had always been ordinary, and his magic was in no way suited to the Astria military family. No matter how hard he tried, he could not match his brother in the art of swordsmanship and was very far behind his sister in magic. His magic and swordsmanship skills were at an average level at best. Though he had earned a doctorate by studying herbology to rely on his magic, many mages were much smarter than him. While his teachers praised Ashto, his father never acknowledged him. His brother's kindness always hurt him. Also, he hardly interacted with his sister, although she adored him as a child. Time after time, Sherry received another marriage proposal, but she was still very young. The hero smiled sadly and thought about the fact that the next time he and she could talk, she would probably already be engaged. There was another girl who was quite kind to the hero, and she really liked his magic. Her name was Muty, and she always smiled gently at him when she praised his utterly boring magic. She was his childhood friend, and they had known each other for years. The girl supported him in his most difficult moments and congratulated him on his doctorate. In honor of this, she decided to give him a gift of a necklace. That's probably when the guy decided to propose to her. He didn't care about being ordinary as long as Muty was around. After writing the letter, the lad decided that when he turned 18, he would propose to her and could leave this house and become independent. Ashto decided that he would work as an herbalist in the city and live the rest of his life with Muty. The hero was firmly convinced of this and stuck to his plan. But reality proved harsh, and his father announced that the second daughter of the military family Feudo Muty would be betrothed to Ledger. This announcement managed to shock the hero. His brother replied that their marriage would strengthen the relationship between the two military families of the kingdom. Ashto clenched his fist and thought about how he shouldn't hate his brother, for he knew it wasn't his fault. But the hero could not live in this house when she would be his brother's wife. The hero went into his father's room and lowered his head in silence. So the father decided to ask the lad what was the matter. He asked him to leave if Ash had no business with him, but the hero wished to say something to his father. He asked for permission to relinquish his status as a member of the Astria family. The father asked his son if he had heard anything about Oberstein, and the boy replied that it was a forest teeming with vile and cruel monsters. It was said that long ago humans and other races lived there and they had no idea what was going on there. But this forest had been given into the care of the Astria for clarification. In that case, my father decided to give these lands to the Ashto. Henceforth, he asked to leave this house and become the ruler of Oberstein. Ashto noticed the letter on the table and realized that his father had not even waited for him to ask for it, but was ready to get rid of him himself. That is how the boy was expelled from the Astria clan. But he couldn't let it piss him off, and he had the tools to clear the territory. In addition, the hero could grow herbs and farm. He could do things he couldn't do in the kingdom, which was bad. He surmised that he could even build his own herb shop, though there probably wouldn't be many customers. Ashto walked through the forest until he came upon a huge tree that struck him. The guy decided it was a great find and took it as a base. The hero applied his magic and asked the plants of nature to answer his call. Ashto asked the spirits of the ancestors blessed by the land to respond. Through his magic, the lad created a wooden man that formed from the roots of the tree. Ashto leaned over to the man and greeted him, saying that it was a pleasure to meet him. Apparently the man could not speak, so the guy decided to call him Wood. The short creature began to run happily around the guy, and the hero realized that it was just a blob of energy and suggested that the wooden man get to work. First of all, they needed a house and they could gather some wood and start building right here, even though it would take a long time. Ashto seemed to know what he should do, but he lacked hands. He also realized that the best wood was the fib wood and the fi wood. The hero looked surprised at the wood, which was clearly trying to take him somewhere and pointing the way. Walking a little further, the hero saw some amazing trees in front of him. It was a phoebe tree, and the lad realized that the wood understood him. Ashto looked gratefully at the creature and set about chopping down the trees. Using his magic and his wand, he cut down an entire tree with one stroke. Glancing at his wand and then at the tree in surprise, Ashto realized that the trees were denser than he had thought and he would have to use a lot of mana. It was hard for the hero to imagine how much would be enough for him. After the hero ran out of mana, he plopped down by the tree and told the tree that he had exhausted all his strength. With all that, he was only able to fell 5 trees. Looking sadly at his hand, the hero wished he had as much mana as Sherry. Ashto yawned and decided that the first order of business was to build a place to sleep. He warned the wooden man that he would rest for a while and asked him to wake him if anything happened. Seeing the worry on the creature's face, the guy smiled and asked him not to worry. He just didn't have any mana at the moment, but he was fine. Ashto tilted his head tiredly and said that he would cover his eyes for a second. After that, the boy fell asleep and the wood watched him silently for a while. After a while the hero woke up and heard a rumbling noise not far from him, which frightened him. Ashto was surprised to see a small man carrying huge logs. The creature placed another log on top of the others and sat on it, watching Ashto. The boy ran up to the wood and laughed with joy. Then he hugged the creature and said he was amazing. Apparently, the wooden creature liked his praise and smiled at the boy. The hero held the creature up like it was the cutest kitten and said that now he had him, so they would work it all out together. So some time passed, since the protagonist and the wooden man began to build their house together. Leaving a bare field, the guy grinned and decided that they had gone too far. He only wanted to build a house, but now they had enough wood and space to build about 10 structures. But what was done was done. Ashto suggested to the woodsman that he finish cutting down the trees and build a house. The lad noticed the creature going into the bushes and surmised that there was something there. Suddenly Ashto was seized by some strange feeling. They had made a lot of noise here earlier and it was not surprising that monsters might come. The hero grabbed his wand and asked the wooden man to hide behind him, assuring him that he could handle it. Barely had the hero aimed his wand when a girl came out to him and asked him not to. Apparently she wasn't an enemy, and the guy noticed that it was an elf girl. The girl said hello to the guy and introduced herself as Elmina. She was a high elf and was pleased to meet the hero. The hero introduced himself to the elf girl and said that apparently he was the ruler of these lands. Elmina surmised that the fellow was a man from the kingdom outside. That was indeed the case, and Ashto said that he was now preparing a place to live here. The elfess grinned and admitted that she had heard about the trees falling for the past few days and thought it was a monster gone mad or something. The hero felt embarrassed and apologized for the noise. He planned to build his house on this cleared space. As soon as the guy said this, his face changed and he decided to ask if the girl was really a high elf. The girl was not just a mere elf, but a high elf from the highest class. It was unclear to the hero why she was wandering here alone in that case. Elmina said that their village was not far away and the guy thought that if the people from the kingdom got wind of it, they would be shocked. Elves were a common sight and many of them worked as herbalists in the kingdom. But high elves were a real rarity and seeing one was like seeing a mirage. At least that was what they said. The hero found it hard to believe that such a top-class race could settle in this forest, but the girl had her own reasons for leaving the village. Ashto wondered, but apparently the girl was hesitant to give those reasons. Still, she confessed that she had once drunk the entire secret liquor supply of the village chief, and he had banished her for the next 1,000 years. She was, of course, ashamed of the act and that she had emptied all of his stockpile, but the headman had absolutely no patience. It was still incomprehensible to her why she was telling the Ashto about it, but the hero had not asked her to tell her about it in detail, and she had sprung it all on him herself. The hero felt as if he had met a less than perfect high elf. The elfess asked him to forget about it, and it seemed to her that he had only wood that could help him. She said that if the guy wanted to build himself a house, he would need help because he couldn't do it alone at all. Elmina was an expert in wind magic, plus she knew a lot of things and decided to give Ashto a huge advantage. The hero thanked the elf for her help, and although she disappointed him, she apparently wished him no harm. The girl turned away from the hero and said to herself under her breath that it was great and now she would have a place to live. But the hero decided to tell her that she had been heard. Ashto smiled and asked permission to introduce himself again. As he had said earlier, he was the ruler of Oberstein. Elmina said it was a beautiful name and thanked the guy for sheltering her. In return, they shook hands. The elven girl was actively helping the guy and they had progressed quite well in the past few days. Elmina turned out to be much more useful than the hero thought, and he could even ask her to do jobs not related to construction. After doing another job, the girl asked what she should do now. The hero wanted to create some agricultural fields and a waterway here. After all, the first step to self-sufficiency is to have food and water. Plus they needed a reservoir where the water from the river would accumulate, and Ashto asked the elf girl to make a hole using magic. Elmina found this task quite easy and she immediately set to work. Looking at her work, the boy surmised that she had even more mana than Sherry. Yet, whether it was farming or building, even with knowledge, they lacked the hands and skills to make things easy. Ashto realized that the food he had brought would soon run out and looked with a smile at the woodwoman that wanted to help him. The guy thought about the fact that if they could find skilled craftsmen, he wouldn't be in this predicament. Suddenly, Ashto heard rumbling and screaming, and the girl called out to him for help. The hero headed back, not realizing what had happened, but what he saw surprised him. An elven girl was trying to help the injured dwarves and called the hero for help. Ashto ran up to the boys and asked what happened to them. One of the dwarves apologized and asked the heroes if they had any healing potions or any medicines. As it turned out, they had been attacked by a wandering monster. The hero suggested that everyone return to the clearing where he could help them and asked Elmina to fetch some water. Guy assessed the scratches and bite marks, saying that they should have washed the wounds thoroughly first. He hoped that no poison had been put there and treated the dwarves' wounds. Ashto asked them not to worry, for he had the training of an herbalist and knew what he was doing. The dwarf was puzzled as to what an ordinary man was doing so deep in the forest. At this time, Elmina came running back with a wooden basin of water and the hero thanked her for her help. Taking off his cloak, the hero promised that he would save them all. The hero then treated the wounds of all the dwarves and applied gauze to them and then bandaged them securely. Ashto finished his work and the dwarves could find no words. One of them thanked the lad for doing a lot for them. The hero smiled and warned that they would be able to walk in about a week, but until then they were to rest and try to move less. The gnome bowed and said that they were indebted to them from now on, but the lad asked not to worry about that. He was glad that they were all right. By the way, Ashto did not know their name and the bearded dwarf remembered that he had forgotten to introduce himself earlier. The gnome's name was August and he was something of a leader of this group. They were traveling through Oberstein and came to this part of the forest in search of ores, but purely by accident they came across a monster. They managed to escape and then they came across an elven woman by the river and were grateful for her help. They dreaded to think that if the young lady had not found them, they would have surely been deflowered by the river and the earth would have swallowed their corpses. But it was incomprehensible to them what a young man like Ashto was doing in such a distant forest. But the hero said it was a long story. The dwarf was delighted that they were so young but could go through so much. But the guy decided that it was okay and thought that since he was stuck here, he should have enjoyed his life. Besides, such a self-sufficient life couldn't be boring, and he got to try a lot of things he couldn't do in the kingdom. The dwarf closed his eyes and said that they could be relied upon. Eventually, he clapped himself on the leg and came to a decision. Since they really wanted to thank them for saving their lives, they decided to vow to help the guy in their life in the forest. In the first place, they needed houses and forges, and the dwarf thought. As the older dwarves, they were willing to lend them all their strength and resources to help, and the man ordered the others to wake up, for they had a backlog of work to do. The bloke became embarrassed and reminded the dwarves that they needed to rest. The hero was quite surprised to hear that they were the older dwarves. He was shocked because they were a very rare race and were considered to be the ancestors of all dwarves. In any case, even if they wanted to help build the house, they could do it in a week after they rested. But it was as if the gnome didn't hear the hero and ordered the others to wake up. Ashto couldn't understand what was going on. After all, rare races began to appear one after another. The hero was indeed asking for help, but he could not have imagined such a thing. The guy grinned as he picked up the wood in his hands and decided that it was just luck. Meanwhile, Ashto's father was in his office going through papers. Suddenly the office door swung open and shouting was heard. The brother and sister demanded an explanation from the father. The father could not understand what had happened and looked at the disgruntled children, Ludger and Cherry, the main family of aristocrats, the kingdom of Big Balog, Istria. There is not a single person in the kingdom who has not heard this name. The current ruler of Purple Warlord Eisen has earned the respect of the community by performing many feats on the battlefield. It was said that his strength was comparable to that of 1,000 warriors. Even now that he was in his 50s, his power continued to grow. But there was something that troubled the great general. The man asked Ludger and Cherry what was the matter, and the girl asked her father a question. She was furious that their father dared to ask such a thing. Ludger approached the father and decided to find out the reason why the Ashto was kicked out of the house. The father asked his children to calm down and the lad asked him to listen. He never wanted to marry a mutie whom the hero liked. Apparently Sherry had never even heard of it and was surprised. Everyone knew that Ashto and Moody had been close since they were children. Not only did his father trample his feelings and ruin the relationship, but he also kicked him out. Ledger realized that it was partly his own fault, for he had been too busy to look after Ashto lately. Still, he thought the decision was unfair. The father asked his son to take a deep breath and listen to him. Sherry lowered her head and said that she had not even heard about it. She had no idea that Lou and Moody could get married. Ledger could not find words for the fact that his father had not told Sherry about it. His father replied that it was only to be told, and so far only he and his wife knew about it. Sherry walked over to her father and grabbed his shoulder. She threatened him that if he didn't want to know what it was like to be frozen from head to toe, he had to tell everything he knew. Dad sighed heavily and decided to tell them everything. Sherry thought this was too cruel even for a political marriage. Ledger also did not want to call one of his subordinates his sister-in-law and address her as an older sister. His father recalled that the Moody's sister was his adjutant, and Ledger did not think the Lunaria would want him as a son-in-law. Father recalled that they could always send her away, but in Ledger's opinion, he could not do that. Besides, Gunkel alone would not be able to cope. Sherry told her father that they were her childhood friends and knew them well. It was because of their help that everything went so smoothly. Besides, if both sides were against the marriage, one could guess what the support of the organization would say. Sherry guessed that Ashto had gone to Oberstein, and her father confirmed her guess. He decided to clarify that the fact that the boy had decided to go there himself was not insignificant. After he found out about the engagement, he wanted to leave the Estrella family, and his father decided to give him the land. The children were shocked at what their father had done. Sherry abruptly wanted to take 20 years off and looked at her father with a strained smile. The father was shocked, and Ledger told beautiful Lady Sherry not to worry, for they would cancel this engagement. He suggested that he and Moody go on a little trip. The father asked the lad in bewilderment how he could say such a thing. No matter how hard the father tried, the children didn't listen to him and ignored his shouts. Sherry smiled at her brother and thought it sounded marvelous, and this way Moody could relax too. The brother smiled at his sister and asked her to leave everything to him, and in the meantime they could have some fun. When the Ledger of Sherry had agreed on everything, they looked disdainfully at the father and asked what he wanted. Their look was convincing enough. The father said not a word to them and sighed heavily. Looking at the large two-story house, the hero was shocked, not realizing what it was. Elrin rejoiced and said that now they could finally say goodbye to the improvised house and the roots of the tree. The boy was certainly sorry that it had to be made out of roots, but that was behind them. Ashto looked at the dwarves with sternness and reminded them that they had a week to recover from their injuries. But the leader replied that there was no such thing and they had made a full recovery in 3 days. One of his group of dwarves said that 4 days was more than enough time for them to build one single house. The guy was shocked that the guys had done what would normally take months in 4 days, and they had insanely fast regeneration. Truth be told, these older dwarves scared the crap out of him. One of the gnomes said they would build their house and a few other empty buildings afterwards. Still, soon their friends had to get to this place. Ashto asked the gnome what they were talking about. The leader replied that he would like to contact the other dwarves that had traveled and suggest that they make this place their base. After all, the hero had done so much for them that they could hardly thank him for it all. So they decided that they would look after him and help with everything until the day he died. The hero was just shocked, and the gnome smiled at the hero, saying that they would take care of him. Ashto was embarrassed. Besides, they didn't even ask him about it. The elven girl thought that was just fine, since the older dwarves were good at crafts. But the guy had noticed it himself, but that wasn't the problem. It was that he just didn't understand why the matter was taking such a turn. The girl laughed and suggested that Ashto call her friends as well. The hero couldn't listen to this anymore and asked them to do what they wanted. In the end, things really got out of hand. Ashto was really grateful that they could share the duties, and this place was very suitable for him. The hero used his magic and asked the earth to break apart. He rejoiced that the earth did indeed become softer. The hero thought that learning farming magic that he couldn't use in battle would never be useful to him, but one could never know what would prove useful. Guy decided to make some plains and then make a greenhouse next to them to grow herbs. And that greenhouse would be his alone, and the lad was delighted at how wonderful it sounded. While Ashto was daydreaming, he heard something and turned around. Behind him he saw wood, but he thought he heard someone's voice. But the boy thought he was just imagining it because the wood could not talk. After a while, Ashto made a field for growing plants. Now that the seeds were planted, all that was left was to apply a little natural magic. Taking a magic wand, the guy ordered them to grow. This magic was to spread energy all over the ground and help the plants to grow. In addition, the hero would be able to harvest the crops several times faster. Also, the plants grown with magic were much tastier than the ones that grew on their own, and the hero couldn't wait to harvest them. Now the only thing left to do was to make a greenhouse, and the hero decided to entrust this to August and the others, so there should be no problems with it. Ashto thought about it and decided that it would be necessary to talk to them and find out everything. The hero told everything to the leader of the dwarves, saying that he wanted to build a greenhouse next to the beds. Ashto doubted that it was possible, but the gnome said they would do it all in 2 days. The gnome also mentioned that you wouldn't find such a thing in these parts, but they would still need it. The elfess didn't understand why they needed all this wailing. The hero explained that he wanted to build a greenhouse across from the beds he had recently made, while they didn't have glass. The elfess didn't understand him, so the guy explained that the greenhouse should have plenty of sunlight but no wind. To achieve this, the walls and ceiling must be made of glass. The dwarves would have loved to do it since the hero had asked them to, but they didn't have the materials. Ashto thought that they couldn't just leave the plants open. They didn't have any glass, of course, but Elrin offered to give him something in return. The girl meant slimes. They were quite hard to catch. Slimes had a low body temperature, and when it rose they hardened. You could mold them into the shape you wanted while they were heating up, and make anything you wanted. They ended up with a rather excellent item, and the hero was delighted at how much the elves knew. The girl Horoto raised her head and reminded him that she was a high elf after all. The dwarves of course knew about this feature of slimes, but never thought of using them instead of glass. The hero noticed that it was even more transparent than glass, plus more malleable, so it would be quite difficult to break. The dwarf was glad that now the guy would not only have a greenhouse, but also a better house. He couldn't wait to get started, and the hero told the elf that she had inspired this marvelous craftsman. A few days later, the heroes built a large greenhouse, and Ashto could henceforth recognize this as a real greenhouse. It was a little empty inside, but the hero decided to grow more and more plants. Elrin walked into the greenhouse, asking the guy how he was doing. The hero was able to finish much faster thanks to their help, and the girl confessed that she was bored with hunting all day. There were many more different plants in the greenhouse than the guy had first thought. There were even essential plants and paralyzing herbs. The hero was also surprised by the stone herbs and admitted that the elf girl had a huge set. The girl was surprised that the guy knew quite a bit. Elves were native to the forest and were well versed in fruits, nuts, and herbs. That was as it should be, considering the environment they lived in. Besides, Elrin had lived much longer than him and had more knowledge than the average human. Ashto recalled the girl earlier talking about being over 8,000 years old. It was hard for the hero to imagine that even August, the eldest dwarf, had said that he was 9,800 years old. But at the hero's request, the elf girl could teach him how to take care of different herbs. The lad was surprised that she had suggested it, but if he wanted to leave as an herbalist, he should have learnt as much as he could about herbs. The elfess winked and said that they were friends with him after all. The hero smiled, thinking about the fact that they were now longtime friends. Elrin became curious about the plants people used and asked the guy to teach her as well. If the hero could trade that for elven knowledge, he could gladly offer her his help. Suddenly Ashto heard something again and looked around, but Elrin heard nothing. The boy confessed that with the recent time he had been hearing some strange sounds like voices, but Elrin replied that she had heard nothing of the sort. She surmised that the hero was simply tired from frequent use of magic, and Ashto agreed with her. The heroes left the greenhouse, and the girl said he should work less and rest more, but the hero couldn't imagine it. One day, when the hero had already learned how to take care of the plants in the greenhouse, something interesting happened. Suddenly the boy felt some tremors, but it didn't feel like an earthquake. He was worried whether the greenhouse would hold up. As soon as the hero got out of the greenhouse, he saw the cause of the strange phenomenon. Earlier, he puzzled over why it had become so noisy. A large dragon appeared right in front of him, wondering who was using his mana on the ground. The hero was shocked at the sight of the dragon, and the beast said that it had been quite some time since a human had been here. The dragon considered it a great fortune that a human mage with the same specialization as hers had come to these lands. Apparently, the dragon had frightened Ashto a great deal, and the dragon had noticed it. The dragon asked the guy not to be afraid as she wasn't going to eat him, but the guy was so scared that he didn't even hear her. In that case, the dragon decided she had no choice and took on human form. The hero stared at the girl in shock, and the girl asked for an opinion on how she looked. She held out her hand to him and said that it had been quite some time, and that was why she wanted to talk to him. The girl asked Ashto come over and asked how long he would sit like that. She smiled and said she was thirsty, hinting that she would love to have some earth tea. The hero recovered a little and put the kettle on. During this time, he learnt that the girl was an emerald dragon Marshalago. The girl replied that she was exactly that and asked to be called simply Shella. The dwarf was quite surprised and never would have thought that he would see a dragon goddess here. It was a real rarity. The guy thought that it wasn't just rare. After all, the emerald dragoness was one of the 7 legendary dragons of this world. It was said that she had created a vast grassland, and as one could guess from her name, she was a powerful dragoness who was revered as a goddess. But the hero thought about the fact that he was already used to the company of the high elf and the older dwarves. The dragon girl smiled and replied that the tea was just fine and the wine was excellent. The elven girl immediately found common ground with her and said that wine was a matter of pride in their village. By the way, the hero wondered where Elmina got this wine from, but it seems lately Ashto has seen a lot of unfamiliar elves here. One of the elven girls apologized for not introducing herself and said her name was Me. The other girl's name was Lunara and they were high elves from the same village as Elmina. Elmina explained that the high elves had read her letter and brought many things for them to look at later, and it seemed that there were more older dwarves here. The hero was beginning to feel like he stood out from the crowd, and Shelley exclaimed that the brandy of the older dwarves was wonderful too. The gnome asked the hero why don't they build a brewery and sow wheat. One of the elves agreed with him and suggested they also make a grape garden. They also didn't want to ask their friends to bring drinks from somewhere, but they were still working on the greenhouse and beds, and the dwarf decided they already had seeds and could extend the water flow. The elf said he would like to drink delicious grape wine whenever he wanted. The elf asked to leave the hunting to him, and the gnome said Ashto that they were counting on him. Finding no words, the boy just laughed nervously, and Shelley smiled, thinking about the fact that she had slept for a long time. She was pleased to see such a lively crowd. Elrin suggested that Shelley go along with her to drink all night and suggested that they make it strictly a party for the girls. The other high elves were shocked that Elmina was still thirsty. Ashto reached the river and sat down on the edge and lowered his head, telling the wood that he was tired. It was not at all easy to sow a whole field by himself. That is, he was grateful to them for the building and the food, but he felt that he had more mana since he came here, but so much work was too much for him. Suddenly, the lady of the Shella came over to him and sat down next to him and asked the hero what he was doing. The guy was surprised at her appearance because he did not even notice how she approached him. He was just resting and trying to make a wheat field and a grape garden, but he ran out of mana. And the hero was also supposed to take care of the vegetable beds and greenhouses, but it was pretty slow. Shella replied that he had taken on too much. The girl smiled slyly and offered the guy her help. Ashto had no time to say anything before the girl's hand was in his mouth. Shelley grinned, asking the guy if he had swallowed everything, and pulled her hand back out. The hero felt sick to his stomach at the thought of the girl doing whatever she wanted to him. He felt bad for a while, and Shelley said that he had now accepted her blessing. After a couple of minutes she inquired about his well-being, and the hero was surprised to feel lightness in his body. Shelley explained to him that because of her blessing, he would no longer have to worry about running out of mana and having more magical power. And since they both had nature magic, they were a perfect match for each other. Previously, the guy hadn't heard anything about the blessing. Ashto asked the wooden man what had happened to him and noticed that he had become a little bigger. Suddenly the animal spoke to him, much to Ashto's surprise. The woodpecker kept saying its name. Shelley explained to them that as the Ashto's magic grew, the woodpecker grew too, and it was great. The creature threw itself into the guy's arms and the hero rejoiced with him. The woodsman was happy to try for the guy, and Shelley grinned looking at this picture. In that case, the girl suggested that they get back to work. She was looking forward to sampling the delicious refreshments. The girl waved goodbye and the guy thanked her for everything. Ashto looked at his hand and felt an amazing feeling as magic spilled over his entire body. It seemed that he now had more mana than Sherry. Peggy pulled the guy by his clothes like a child and the hero took him in his arms. He was insanely happy that the creature had grown and now he was like a human child. To be honest, the hero was startled by the fact that mana was oozing right through him. Such was the blessing of one of the 7 legendary dragons. The hero turned to the wood and he wondered what would happen to them next. Elrin ran up to the hero and the lad thought that their vine garden was ready. Elrin was also amazed at how the wood had grown. The boy explained to the elves that it was all because his magic had become stronger thanks to the blessing of the Shella. The elves were surprised to hear about Shella's blessing, and the hero could understand them, for he too was surprised at first. But now he wanted to check something. Elrin wondered what the hero wanted to test on the grape seedling. Thus, the guy wanted to know how much mana he had now, and asked the sapling to grow. Barely had the guy had time to apply magic, the saplings began to turn into real trees and strengthened before his eyes. The elves were thrilled to see the sapling turn into a tree in a matter of seconds, but apparently things got out of hand later. The elves screamed and hit the hero on the head, calling him a fool and saying that he used too much magic. Ashto could only dream of such a thing, for his mana was still flowing and he felt no limit. It felt like it could have gone on forever. Suddenly, Elrin swooped down on the hero and grabbed him from behind and asked him to stop. Hearing their screams, the dwarves decided to check out what all the commotion was about. Seeing the big grape tree and the heroes in front of them, they could not understand what had happened here. Looking at the tree, Ashto and Elrin were shocked. The guy laughed nervously and the elven girl was stunned at how insane his mana supply was. It all looked like it was someone's joke. The elfess exclaimed that the guy had many times more mana than a normal human, and it was probably because of the blessing. Ashto walked over and plucked a grape. He wondered how he turned out and it looked pretty good. The hero held out a bunch to the girl and Elrin decided to ask his opinion. Meanwhile, the other elves watched them with interest. The boy exclaimed that the grapes were very tasty and he had never eaten such delicious grapes before. Elrin could not believe that this was true, and the lad confirmed it, saying that it was very sweet, large, and juicy. In that case, the girl asked for a taste and her cheeks turned red. After chewing the grapes, a smile appeared on her face. The elven girl exclaimed that it was very tasty and it was even better than the grapes from their village. Looking at their reaction, everyone else immediately wanted to try the grapes. The elves said that it was quite juicy, and they had never tasted anything like it in all their 8,000 years of life. The leader of the dwarves examined the berry in surprise and said that it was mind-boggling. He announced to the boys that they had a break from now on and needed to split up. The leader said they needed a team to make barrels and a team to build a brewery. They needed to build a big brewery and make a bunch of kegs. The dwarf remarked that Ashto's magic was real, and they were counting on him to make the wheat grow in the same way. The elfess asked May and Lunara to go back to the village and bring as many seedlings as possible. She also asked to take some grapes for tasting in the village and was sure that the headman would be happy to help them. The girls gladly accepted her request. Elrin told the hero that he would need to grow all the seedlings and suggested that he start by making bancha wine. Ashto was certainly glad that everyone was so excited about the idea of making wine, but they still had nothing ready. They still hadn't cleared a sufficient area and there were stumps that needed to be removed first. The farms were also still unfinished. In order to build a vineyard or anything else, they had to create the right support for the plants, string ropes, and a lot of other things to take care of. With just the wood alone there was a ton of work and Elrin wondered. The girl suggested that her friend go to the village and bring someone with her who would be interested in their business. But May didn't think the men would want to, but there were a few women who had nothing better to do and the girl decided to ask them. Ashto asked them to stop, but Elrin reminded them that he needed help. The elven woman said they would listen to him, so she asked him not to worry. Everyone caught on to the idea and decided to do it. Previously, the guy had planned to spend his days studying medicinal herbs, but it turned out to be different. The guy sighed and looked up at the sky with a smile. Meanwhile, the hero's father was in his study and thumped his desk loudly, not understanding what it all meant. His father thought he would be left out after all that had happened, but did not expect a notice of termination. It had been 2 months since his father informed them of Ash's resignation and they had not made any fuss, even doing their work properly. The father could not think that such a thing could have happened and they were really talking absolute rubbish. Sherry only apologized to her father, but he got angry and said that she wanted to take a leave of absence and did not understand in that case why she should quit right away. The girl asked him not to shout so much, but she thought it was obvious, for he would never let her leave, so she wrote the application herself. The king himself gave his consent and now she is a civilian and has nothing to do with the military. Her father was horrified and Shelley again asked him not to yell. The father did not understand how she could have left the army so soon and surmised that it had something to do with Ashto. The girl thought about it and admitted that it was the impetus. She pondered for a long time about what had happened to Ashto, and then she realized that she was already 17 years old and she had never been able to enjoy her youth. The father looked at his smiling daughter in surprise, not knowing what she was talking about. But Shelley was talking specifically about youth. For as long as she could remember she had been training all the time, but now she wanted to see the world. So she decided to go traveling, thus killing her father with those words. Shelley also gave notice that she would take the muties with her, and Liu would put in a good word for them with the feudal commander. Father again shouted at the top of his voice and suggested that she listen to him. He tried to explain to her that the girl was a daughter of the Estraya clan and a trustworthy mage, and she was nicknamed the Ice Princess. He could not let her go so selfishly. In that case, the girl suggested that he expel her from the family. In fact, she didn't care about the name of the Estraya family, thus driving her father into a dead end. She thought her father did not understand and decided to put it simply. She was angry at him for kicking Ashto out and thought she had nothing to blame him for. Earlier, her father had not told her or Lou about it. Worse, he had sent him to the monster-infested Oberstein forest. Sherry could not accept that this was what a real parent could do to their child. She was absolutely certain that to her father the boy was just an eyesore and unnecessary in the family Estraya. But to her and to Lou, Ashto was a blood brother and an important member of the family. Their mother could say nothing to him and all the father thought about was the family honor. Lou also regretted that he never really paid attention to Ashto and rarely interacted with him. In truth, Sherry also regretted it. And from then on, she no longer wanted to regret anything. The girl could barely hold back her tears and covered her face with her hand, but her father asked her to listen. The father surmised that she now understood everything. Sherry said that as of today the brilliant daughter of the Estraya family, the Ice Princess, no longer existed and she was leaving on a trip. She was perfectly fine with her father deciding to exclude her from the family and proceeded to the exit. Her father asked his daughter to stop, but it was too late. Sherry greeted the muties with a smile. Sherry apologized for being late, but the girl replied that it was alright, for she herself had just arrived. Nudie laughed and confessed that she was excited about their adventure, and Sherry agreed with her. Sherry decided to warn her that this was her first trip and there would be more than just games and fun. She had to be prepared for hardship as well, and the girl understood her. Nudie put her hand on his chest and admitted that she was madly anxious to see him. She missed Ashto madly, and Sherry also wondered where her brother was now. Oberstein was a very large. Plus it was undeveloped and there were a lot of dangerous monsters and they had to be prepared for anything. Sherry once again apologized for the wait to the muties. The girl smiled, and as she said earlier, it was fine, but that wasn't what Sherry meant. She was sorry that it had taken them so long to decide on the day of departure. People didn't want to accept her request, so it took a long time. The girl laughed and told Sherry that it was alright, and Sherry surmised that Mutie had also left the family. The girl admitted that she needed time to prepare herself for the separation from her family, and Ludger and Luna helped everything go smoothly. Sherry thought she would also be kicked out soon so that there would be less weight on her shoulders. Mutie said that Ludger had come to her earlier to apologize. He said he was sorry that she had been caught up in his father's quirks. He bowed so hard that he hit his forehead on the floor and was bleeding, but even then he didn't stop. The moon, then, was too angry with him, and he was nothing but trouble. Sherry laughed and said it was like Lou. The girls hoped that this would help them get closer to each other. After all, Luna had always admired Ludger and they suited each other. Mutie was confident that together they would be happy. Sherry smiled and took the girl under her arm and said that she too would find her happiness. Mutie reciprocated Sherry's affection. The girls held hands and Mutie bid them set out on their journey. Mutie wanted to travel faster in order to find Ashto. Sherry agreed with her and said that it was necessary to find this fool who suddenly decided that she no longer needed her. Meanwhile, the hero was talking nonchalantly to his wood. While the protagonist was planting trees, Elrin came up to him and announced that they had guests. It was a whole family, and judging by their horns, they were ogres. The lad surmised that they needed something, and the children's father asked to call the man in charge. He apologized for the unexpected visit. They just had a bit of a cheeky request. The father wanted to ask for medicine, but the hero didn't quite understand what they didn't need it for. Ashta asked about injuries or illnesses and also asked him to tell him the symptoms and show him who was sick. The hero noticed how the man was confused and asked him not to worry because he had a herbalist's license, and if they let him examine the sick person, he could give them herbs that were more effective in their case. The man looked at one of the ogre girls waiting for an answer. The ogre girl let herself be examined, and the lad noticed that it was bay leaf poison. It was certainly dangerous, but it was not life-threatening if just touched. Ashta said he would make an ointment for her and also give her an oral medication just in case. The man stroked the girl's head and apologized for the inconvenience. Ogre thanked Ashto for the inspection and thought about paying, but the guy asked not to worry about it. There were quite a few herbs growing here, and if they didn't fix it now, her skin would rot. So action had to be taken immediately. The hero smiled and asked the girl not to worry. After all, they just needed to heal the burn and everything would be fine. The ogre girl grasped her father's leg in disbelief, as if she was afraid of being dragged away somewhere. The hero wanted to know about where they lived and asked that their family stay here until the girl was fully recovered. The man lowered his gaze and admitted that they had no place they could call home. Ashto was surprised, and the man told him that they were residents in the ogre village until recently, but when a new chief came to power, they were driven out. The hero decided to find out the reason, and the man explained that they were demonic ogres. Their race was rare and they were persecuted even by their brothers. The guy was shocked, for demonic ogres are a legendary race known as avatars of demons. One such ogre had the strength of 100 ordinary ogres, and they must have been messing with him. The hero thought it was surprising, but he was already used to the surprises this place gave him. Besides, the ogres were polite and very caring and seemed kinder than the legend said. A marvelous idea occurred to the hero, and he suggested that they should in that case settle here. They just had vacant houses, plus the hero wanted to be sure that their daughter would get the right treatment. The man was shocked and decided to ask the guy if he knew what rumors were going around about them. They didn't want to scare the locals, but the hero calmed them down and told them that they were too late because the higher elves and older dwarves already lived here. The man could not even believe his ears when he heard about the high elves. He assumed that the young lady who had brought them here was also a high elf. The hero smirked and said that she was not so young, for she was over 8,000 years old. And those dwarves who were busy building were the supreme dwarves. The ogres found this hard to believe, but what surprised them even more was that the hero was an ordinary man. The man absolutely did not expect to meet so many legendary races here, and it was indeed an amazing village for them. But the hero thought about the fact that to him, their entire family was legendary in its own way. Thus, the demonic ogre family settled in one of the houses built by the dwarves. To them, it was just an amazing building, and this house was perfect for their large family. Their father's name was Balgald, their mother's name was Armo, and their daughter was Norma. They also had a son named Shinha. Elrin showed the Balgold family the nearby hunting grounds and was surprised that she and Arma were brother and sister. But the man explained that it was customary for ogres to marry their relatives, and the elven woman did not know that. Strength was paramount to their race, and it was in their blood that children born to close relatives would grow up strong and sturdy. Drawing the bowstring, the man aimed the bow at the huge serpent that had swarmed to attack the ogre. In a few moments the serpent was defeated by the Balgold, who carried the carcass of the huge serpent on his shoulder. It was hard for the dwarf to guess how long they would be able to keep the beast, for the thing was nearly 22 years old. The ogre saw nothing surprising in this, and in his opinion it was perfectly ordinary prey. The hero smiled nervously and said that they would celebrate it today. And from then on the Balgold began to delight them with their daily prey. One day he brought them a huge boar. The people had so much food that they had to build a separate storehouse. Now, thanks to the demonic ogres, the food problem was solved. Ashto could cook vegetables, but to be honest, he was a little worried about meat. It was fine and wonderful that their lives were getting better and better every day. While the hero was mulling it over in the greenhouse, Elrin ran up to him and said that she had good news for him. The grapes he had grown were a success in the village and they had sent some grape growers to them. The girl's eyes lit up, for the elves wanted them to build vineyards and grow all kinds of grapes. Elrin couldn't understand what was the matter, and apparently the hero was not very happy about it. Ashto surmised that she wished he had used his magic to cultivate. He was surprised at how the cultivation spell worked, but honestly, he didn't want to use magic that disrupted the natural order of things. The girl shook her hands, not understanding what Ashto was saying, because the plan had already been set in motion. The hero didn't understand her plan. He could level the ground and all, but he would want to grow plants as he wished. Elrin tried to press his responsibilities and said that he was the ruler and so he should put some effort into helping the residents. The lad reminded her that his family ruled Oberstein, but that the other races living here were unaware of that and he doubted they could recognize his family's dominance here. The Elfess hesitated and said that at least their village didn't know that there was a kingdom of humans somewhere. But the forest belonged to no one, and no one could monopolize this space, and the hero was the first to settle in the forest. So at least this small strip of land definitely belonged to him. And for building or farming, his permission was needed here. People hunted and crafted because they felt they owed Ashto. Even the demon ogres offered him their prey, and they considered him the ruler of the land. In that case, the girl asked the hero to help build them a vineyard. In the end, the hero had to agree to this, but he warned that he would not be diligent with the cultivation spell. It was one thing to cultivate the land, but he wasn't going to use so much magic on something that would simply be consumed. Elrin agreed to such terms and said that it suited her. She figured they would all do a good job and then let the grapes just grow. They also counted on the Ashto and the wheat field issue. In the meantime, they would take care of building the necessary equipment to make whiskey. Also, the girl said that about 10 grape growers were coming who were going to live here and they had to organize everything. In that case, the elf girl said goodbye to the hero and said that she needed to find August and the others and ask them to build more houses. The guy thought that she couldn't just put something like that into the conversation and run away. Suddenly Ashella appeared behind the hero, noticing that Elrin was rather loud, but nice. Not understanding anything, the guy agreed with her and admitted that he had not met someone like that before. There was an awkward pause, after which the hero turned round abruptly, not expecting to meet Ashella here. The hero hadn't noticed her coming here, and the girl smiled, saying that she was pleased to hear what he had said. He had said earlier that he didn't want to use magic that disrupted the natural order of things and thus cared about nature. The girl smiled and told the boy that he was a good boy. Remembering something, Ashto wanted to ask about the blessing of Lady Shelu, who for some reason gently touched his chin. The girl reminded him that he could just call her Shella and the hero agreed. She asked him not to worry about the magic she had bestowed upon him. After all, they were now mentally linked and the magic he was using was coming to him from the Shella. The boy blushed and told her he understood how it worked. Shella smiled and said that his magic wouldn't affect the earth or plants, but there was something more important than that. The girl whispered in her ear that it gave her pleasure, but the hero had absolutely no idea what she meant. Shella had been asleep for quite some time and hadn't used her mana, so she had a feeling of that old pressurizing magic being released. So it really gave her pleasure and she could save up new magic. She whispered in Ashto's ear, "Did he see it?" Barely had she moved closer to the hero as he abruptly moved away from her, much to the amusement of Shella. She called him an innocent little boy, which seemed amusing to her. The girl got to her feet and admitted that it was only a joke, but it was quite nice of him. The boy looked at the girl in shock, not realizing what if it was a joke. Shella smiled and said that he had the right to decide how to use her magic. He could respect the ground beneath their feet or he could help Elmina. Either way, the choice was left to him. Heading for the exit, the girl wished him luck. The hero was not himself and thought that this girl was something with something. After examining Norma's arm, the hero praised her for doing a great job with it and everything is completely healed. The girl happily hugged her doctor, thanking him for his help. Her mother told the girl that it wasn't nice and bowed and thanked the hero again for his help. But the boy thought he had done nothing, and he was glad she had no scars. While they were talking, Elrin came in to see them. She asked the hero for a moment. Ashto asked the girl what was the matter, and Elrin told him that May and Lunara had returned from the village. To all this, they turned out to have one problem. Ashto looked questioningly at the elven girl, not understanding what the problem was. One of the elven women said hello to Ashto. They were glad to be back in the village. The boy wanted to ask May what was the matter, and the girl asked him to look at the many saplings that they had managed to get. She smiled and decided that they were going to have a whole vine forest. She couldn't wait to taste the wine from these grapes. Ashto leaned over the elfess and once again said her name. Earlier, the hero had already heard that 10 more elves were to come to them, but he didn't understand what the problem was. And besides, he wondered how come there were so many beastmen here. One of the girls in a maid costume with ears turned to Ashto-san. Earlier, Mistress May had told them that he would now be their master. 50 girls came to him, and they were all from the Silver Cat clan. They wanted to work in this settlement to serve their lord Ashto. The lad was utterly perplexed and apologized to them, not understanding what was going on here. All 50 cats bowed and thanked the Ashto lord for accepting them. They explained that they were from the Silver Cat clan, and they were a rare race. They became much stronger if they served a human. But without a human, they could only use a fraction of their strength, making them much weaker than other clans. Even worse, if they lost a human, they became tired and weak, sometimes lacking the strength to even eat. Being weakened, they could become a target for other beastmen or monsters. These girls lost their master due to illness and were banished from their home. May found them when they were running away from the monster, and apparently they were very tired and exhausted. They also had a child with them, so there was no way the elven woman could pass them by. Such a position was questionable, but the guy understood everything. Besides, the hero needed help with the vineyard, and the girls could be very useful. They were resourceful and could do anything for him. They could even help the dwarves, so May decided that they would be useful. Ashto got tired of it all and apologized. But looking closely at them, the girls did look rather shabby. The guy noticed a child that had her arms around one of the girls and was looking at Ashto with hope in her eyes. The hero agreed and asked them about how they could be helped. But it turned out to be much simpler, and the hero had to say he would become their lord, and Ashto agreed. Ashto could only remember those quiet days when he was all alone in the forest. He asked all the girls of the Silver Cat clan to listen to him. Ashto announced to all of them that he would be their master from today. After his words, magic unbeknownst to him occurred and the people glowed. Thus their contract was concluded, and the girl thanked Mr. Ashto. She promised him that from today they would serve him. The girl smiled and asked him to order them. The hero inquired if they really needed to be given orders all the time. The cat replied that the Silver Cats would do their best to please their master. She also said that in the future it would not be necessary to give them orders. Be that as it may, it was so in their nature that they had to do their master's bidding first. The hero was embarrassed but had nothing to do and asked everyone to get ready. He asked everyone to wash their clothes and take a bath, and then to eat and rest well. Ashto asked Almina and the other girls to help them, and they gladly took up his errand. The vineyard was already growing, so everything was fine. But as for me, the hero especially expected hard work from her, and the elfess agreed with the lord. The elven women filled wooden basins full of water and began bathing the beastmen. After bathing, they changed their clothes for clean ones and started eating. The father of the ogres again brought the hero a huge boar carcass. The lad told the dwarf that the Silver Cats had appeared here 3 days ago, and the village was already pretty full. The gnome replied that these ladies were simply amazing, plus they performed any tasks they. The amazing crafting skills of the dwarves and the incredible speed of the Silver Cats made the work quite efficient. They made a good team, and no one in the entire continent could match them. But now they had a dozen elder dwarves, 18 high elves, 4 demon ogres, and as many as 50 Silver Cats. Eventually this small settlement grew into a large village. By the way, the dwarf wanted to notify the Ashto that 15 more of their friends were coming to join them, and the guy just didn't have the words. They still had a lot of work to do at the winery, farms, and blacksmith shop, so they had no time to put their hands down. The gnome clapped the lad on the back and suggested that they all try hard. The Silver Cats made it easier, and it was possible to divide up the duties, thus handling a lot more work in a shorter time. It was thanks to them that the dwarves were able to expand their territories so quickly. Of course, the hero was certainly grateful for this and noticed that these dwarves were going to settle here permanently. Suddenly a girl appeared on their path who assumed that the guy was Ashto. She was pleased to meet them and remarked that the problem with the Silver Cats had taken up a lot of their time. The elfess apologized for not introducing herself earlier and corrected her glasses. Her name was Ashira, and her family made a living growing grapes, so she was confident that she could help the Ashto village. The hero shook her hand and thanked her for her help. Ashto noticed that she seemed to be a rather knowledgeable elf. Almina had a very different aura, and it was the first time the hero had seen someone who made such an impression on him. The girl asked permission to ask the hero a question. Ashiro wanted to ask the hero to expand the vineyard and suggested that 20 times the size would be enough. Ashiro thought he had misheard and decided to ask a question. Ever since the village added troubles, something important was also changing in the boy's life. The little beastman woke up the hero and said that it was time for them to have breakfast. Ashto stroked the girl's head and wished her a good morning, thanking her for waking him up. Every hero's morning began by being awakened by the call of this little silver cat that thought it was his job. The boy left the room and wished the Silmeria a good morning. The girl smiled and told the gentleman that his breakfast was ready. Silmeria was the chief of the Silver Cats. She and Maya lived and worked in the hero's house. When they asked him for it, he refused them at first, but they were so upset that he couldn't refuse them again. They originally wanted him to take care of all 50, so this option wasn't so bad. The hero couldn't live with all of them, so they decided that Silmeria would represent all of their clan and live with him. Maya was very attached to Silmeria, and she is the youngest among the cats, so she stayed here too. The meals became more sumptuous with milk and chicken that Maya had brought from the village. Taking a seat at the table, the boy thought that soon they would have to have livestock. Ashto looked at the cats and said that he had told them many times that they could sit down and have breakfast with him. But the girl replied that since they were his servants, they could not sit at the same table with him. The boy explained that if they ate together, it would be easier to clean up afterwards, and if they finished eating faster, they could go and help the others. Besides, apparently Maya was hungry and Silmeria looked sternly at the girl. After thinking about the guy's proposal for a bit, the girl agreed and they sat down at the same table. Earlier, Ashto had already told them enough, but he would like them to eat with him and the cats accepted the request. In appearance, Maya reminded the boy of a kitten that lived in their neighborhood. He was just as small with fluffy ears. Ashto lowered his gaze sadly, remembering how Moody had cared for him. The boy thought that if she were here now, she would probably like it here, but he doubted he would ever see her again. Meanwhile, Sherry and Moody boarded the next train. They hoped to find a hero next time. Moody looked out the window with a smile, seeing the beautiful scenery and wishing she could see him again. While the hero was studying books with various plants, he was approached by May. The girl brought him tea and the boy thanked her for her work. Ashto looked out of the window and it seemed to him that everything was going smoothly with the harvest. Outside the window, people were carrying 4 barrels of different crops and talking to each other. They wanted excessively large fields, so the hero was initially worried about it. A few days earlier, all the seedlings were ready. Ashira smiled and suggested that they put their best foot forward. Thanks to her guidance, the vineyard was ready quite quickly. All that was left was to use hero magic to make the seedlings grow. A whole group of fans gathered in front of his work, shouting that everything was in Ashto's hands. The girls wished the guy good luck and Elrin asked him to give his best. The hero looked at the girls and said that they were acting like it was some kind of festival. Shella was delighted at this magnitude and Ashto again didn't notice her sneaking up on him. While Shella was having fun with their anticipation, the hero thought that she always appeared as if out of nowhere. It really did feel like a real festival, but the hero was just using magic to grow things here. He didn't understand why they had to set up something like this and Shella thought that Ashto had already noticed it. To everyone, he was the hope here. Wine was the source of life for the elder dwarves and higher elves, and he was creating this drink for them. Moreover, the hero did so much in such a short period of time and even the demonic ogres were happy to taste this wine. Such divine power should have made the silver cats even more loyal. And of course, the girl herself couldn't wait to taste this wine. She had been sleeping quietly, but Ashto had managed to wake her up and she was going to make the most of the fun. The boy chuckled ironically as he looked at the Shella. He wondered what would happen to him in the future. Shella was sure that he would certainly live the most splendid and happy days of his life. She poked her finger into his chest and said that he had to keep their hope in his heart now as well. The boy looked at the excited people and decided that this was true. He didn't live up to his parents' expectations and suffered every day from lost love. But things had turned out differently and now everyone had hopes for him and every day was full of anticipation and fun. The boy thought about the fact that he was in too unusual a situation. In that case, he took out his magic wand and set to work. As the saplings grew from his magic, everyone watched his magic with delight. At this time, Ashto remembered Muti and wished her happiness. Meanwhile, Ashto decided to do everything to live happily in this place. When the harvest started, all he had to do was to take care of the greenhouse and the beds. He was relieved and the hero was lucky that he could now devote his time to the study of herbalism. Maya watched Ashto and she wondered if it was fun to do the reading. Even though it wasn't a storybook, but apparently Maya wanted to try reading too. After thinking for a bit, the girl immediately changed her mind and wanted to play outside. As expected, she was still a child and it was logical that she would refuse. Tasting the tea that the girl brought, the boy wondered that he had never thought of other drinks. It tasted more like warm water than tea. The hero decided to look into the matter, for he had spent quite a lot of time on wine. Ashto remembered Shelley's earlier words that she would try a nice herbal tea. The book May had given him contained some information about tea trees, and if he used search magic he would surely find them in the wild. Ashto thought that was great, but May didn't understand what he meant at all. Ashto suggested that May find a tree together and go for a walk, which the girl was happy to do. Now that the hero was walking quietly through the woods, he could see how isolated this place was from human influence. There were quite a few species of plants here, and they could find tea leaves even faster than he thought. Turning his head, Ashto noticed a May swinging on a tree branch and was horrified. He shouted to the girl that it was dangerous and asked her to come down. May agreed with him and unhooked herself from the tree, flying down. Ashto ran to the girl who was doing somersaults in flight and was afraid she would hurt herself. But no sooner had he reached May than he tripped and fell face first into the ground. Meanwhile, May landed gently on the ground. She asked the gentleman if he was alright, and Ashto realized that the silver cats were real acrobats. He only asked Maya not to do such dangerous tricks again, and the girl agreed. Ashto heard the sounds of wood and approached her, asking what was wrong. It was not incomprehensible to the hero why she was eating leaves. She could also absorb nutrients from the roots, but he didn't know that she was eating leaves just for fun. Peg pointed to the bushes of the tree, and the hero surmised that they were just tea leaves. He decided to make sure and looked up their description in the textbook. It was amazing that they found them so quickly, and the wood shrub exclaimed that the tea leaves were very tasty. In that case, the hero took his magic wand and suggested that they take one bush. It was necessary to soften the soil so as not to damage the roots. When the ground softened, the hero lifted the whole bush with a piece of earth and wrapped it in a sack. May and the woodpile were delighted with their master's abilities. Ashto hefted the huge heavy bush on his back and May supported him, saying he could do it. Peg offered her help, but the hero replied that he was fine. Ashto remembered the Balgold and wished he had called him along. But if he was going to live here, he needed to get stronger too. By some miracle, the guy was able to carry this big and heavy bush to the greenhouse. May and Wood jumped up happily and exclaimed that Ashto-san was amazing. Based on how much effort it took, the hero decided that it wouldn't be easy. May decided to find out where they would land him. Ashto decided that they would plant it near the vineyard, plus they still had a few fields. He thought they would make a tea plantation out of them, so May decided to carry the bush, picking it up with ease. The lad thanked her for her help, and May suggested that the tree should have a race, to which the creature was very glad. In the meantime, the two hidden figures had reached the castle gates. They had been warned that beyond this boundary they would be very close to Oberstein. The soldier asked them to be careful, and the two figures thanked him, whereupon the soldier opened the gate. The girls walked out of the castle, after which they removed their hoods. Sherry took a deep breath and said that she was tired. Muty was also glad that the guards didn't stop them. Oberstein was too big and they had checkpoints everywhere, and finding exactly where Ashto was really hard. At last they could begin their journey, and Muty hoped that Ashto was alright. Sherry reassured her. She was sure that her brother was alright. After all, it was her brother. The girls headed to Oberstein and decided to start searching. Oberstein was an undeveloped territory within the kingdom of the Great Balog. It was said that humans and other species had lived on this land in the past, but now Oberstein was swarming with vile and dangerous monsters, and no one had a complete understanding of this territory due to its large size. Upon encountering the huge serpent, Sherry asked Muty to step back and took the blow. The girl knew it was pretty dangerous here, but she didn't think it was that bad. She couldn't believe that they had encountered something like this in just half a day. Sherry ordered Muty to run away as this monster was too strong. But Muty was scared out of her wits. She fell to the ground and the serpent slowly approached her, preparing to attack. Sherry protected the girl with her back and received another blow. She told Muty to get a hold of herself and get out of here. Sherry was surprised when Muty apologized to her. At some point, Sherry fell unconscious and Muty didn't know what to do. Apparently the snake was poisonous, and Muty hugged Sherry without a drop of hope, preparing to die. The girl closed her eyes and did not notice the unknown creature cutting off the serpent's head. Towards Muty and Sherry came a family of ogres that was glad to catch another meal. But suddenly one of the boys saw the girls and told his father there was someone there. The ogre's sister was surprised to see a person there, and her son surmised that the girl had been hurt. Muty thought they were ogres, though they were bigger than the others, and for some reason their skin was dark, as were their horns. Galvius approached Muty, suspecting that this little snake had done it. He asked the girl if she could neutralize the poison herself, and the Muty waved her head in the negative. In that case, they had to hurry back to the village, and the ogre asked them to follow them. He said that their village chief was an excellent herbalist and he would definitely be able to help them. The father told Armo and Norma that they would carry the girls, and Sheena was to bring the head of the snake. Ogre's sister told Muty that they would be alright and asked Norma to take the other girl. Muty was surprised when she was picked up by the little girl that she asked her not to bite her tongue. When Moody saw the village, she couldn't believe her eyes. There were elves, dwarves, and even a cat clan here. She had never heard of villages where so many different races lived together. The ogre family had directed them to the headman's house, and the ogre girl was confident that the boy would be able to save her friend. Moody somehow thought that the headman would be a typical old man and had already visualized this image in her head. The little girl opened the door and told the hero that there was a wounded man here, but she was met by the girl cat. She squinted at the girl, tired of repeating to her about knocking first before entering. Norma apologized to the Solmeria and asked where the headman was. The girl replied that he was now in the greenhouse and looked at the injured. Nudie explained to her that her friend had been injured, and the Solmeria asked her to take her to the examination room and stay with her for a while. The girl decided to run after the headwoman and ran off. Sherry was carried to the examination room where she lay unconscious for a while. Moody was agitated and asked Sherry to hold on. Solmeria suggested that she was poisoned, and Moody explained that she had been bitten by a snake earlier. The girl said that in that case, they would need the snake to make an antidote. The ogre's wife said that her husband had killed the snake and it had stayed with him. The girl decided to ask to bring it here. Solmeria thanked the girl, and the Moody heard the Maya pushing up the headman. The boy said he was on his way, and Moody got a shiver from that familiar voice. The hero asked the Mayu not to push him. At some point, the girl turned her head and met Ashto's gaze. The guy froze in place, unable to believe his eyes. Moody was shocked to see Ashto here, and the boy didn't understand what they were doing here either. But he quickly forgot about it when he saw the wounded Sherry. He assumed that she was poisoned, and Moody said that they had been attacked by a poisonous snake in the woods. Solmeria said that Armo had the remains of the snake, so they would definitely be able to prepare an antidote. In that case, the guy asked for hot water to be brought and asked Sherry to wait a little longer. He had many questions and he was sure to save her. The cat girl lifted the girl up while the guy stirred the antidote. They made the medicine, after which they drank it with Sherry. Ashto smiled and told Moody that she would be alright. They just had to watch her condition. The hero apologized to the Silmer for burdening her, but a room had to be prepared for the Moody. With the girl gone, they could now talk in private. Moody smiled sadly and greeted Ashto. There was an awkward pause between them, and the hero decided to find out how he and Sherry had come to be here. But Moody thought it was obvious, and they had come here to find Ashto. The boy was surprised at this decision, for Moody was to be married. Moody coldly told him that she would not marry Ludger and told him that Sherry and Ludger had helped them break off the engagement. Besides, Ludger himself was against the marriage. A lot of things happened during this time, but Sis Moon, Ludger and Sherry helped her. And it was all so she could find Ashto. But it seemed to the girl that she was too late. For the hero lived in the same house with a rather beautiful woman, and Moody realized that there was no room for her in his life. The hero asked her to take her time to decide if she was talking about the Solmeria. After all, it wasn't something she could think of. The guy explained to her that Solmeria was his housekeeper and was his assistant. Even though it was the same thing, the hero thought he had no reason to lie and said that he had no one else now. Moody was happy to hear this and they smiled at each other. Moody wanted to know about his life here and what the hero was doing here. Besides, she didn't know what had happened since he had left their home. The hero said it was a long story and wasn't sure if Moody would want to hear it. But the girl wanted to know everything, and besides she had a lot to tell him too. Ashto covered Sherry with a blanket and waited for her to wake up. The hero heard a rustle and noticed that Sherry was beginning to come to her senses. He approached her bed and asked her not to move. Sherry could hardly believe that it was Ashto in front of her, and the hero smiled. It was really her brother, and Sherry started crying. The hero told her that she was safe now. The girl pounced on her brother, happy to see them, and the hero asked her to be easy. Ashto asked her not to worry and told her that Moody was fine too. She needed something to drink and Ashto offered her sister tea. Sherry didn't understand where they were and Ashto decided to explain everything to her. The guy dressed his sister's wounds, who listened to him. Based on his story, he was the headman of this village. The hero could not refuse this, and rather it just happened that way. Ashto decided to ask his sister what they were going to do next, but it was obvious to Sherry. She and Moody would stay with him, of course. That was the reason she had left the family. The boy looked at Moody and the girl gave an affirmative answer. Moody smiled and looked away, saying that now they could always be together. There was a knock on the door and May told the guy that she brought them tea. The hero allowed her to enter and the girl apologized for the intrusion. Maudie and Sherry were crazy about her. This girl cat was insanely cute and Sherry decided to ask her brother who she was. Ashto explained that she was his assistant. Maya bowed with tray in hand and was happy to meet the girls. She said her name and the girls introduced themselves to her as well. Sherry smiled at Maya and asked her to approach her. The girl grabbed the girl and hugged her like she was a plush toy. Sherry was sure her brother thought the same way and that Maya was very nice. The boy agreed with her. The girl had fluffy ears and rather silky hair. She remembered about the tea and sprang from her seat, asking them to wait a little while. The girl beckoned them to follow her, and Ashto thanked her for the tea. Silmara apologized and made sure they were all awake. The hero decided to introduce them all and introduced his little sister Sherry and also his childhood friend Muti. They would now be living here, and the hero apologized for the surprise but hoped the Silmar would be polite to them. The guy introduced his housekeeper to the girls, who bowed to them. She was delighted to meet them. Silmara asked Miss Muti to follow her to show her to her room. Sherry wondered what her brother was doing, and the hero explained that he was writing down all his patients, their injuries and illnesses, just as he was finishing her medical records. The guy smiled and noticed that Sherry had put on weight, and the girl thought about him wanting to hint that she was fat. The hero smiled and said he didn't mean it. It was just that she had become very different since they had last lived together. Hero didn't even know how many years had passed since she called him brother anymore. She had become a commander of elite troops and was as promising as a ledger. She was so busy that she was almost never home, and the last time she spoke to him, he was still learning his magic. But it was more of a greeting than a real conversation. It was a real surprise to him, and he didn't hide the fact that it was amazing to see her and hear her, especially that she wanted to stay here. But suddenly Sherry said that it was also his fault. Indeed, her work in the army kept her busy and she didn't even have much time to be at home. But everyone was worried about him. The hero couldn't believe such a thing, but the girl exclaimed that it was true. It was true that they had drifted apart, but they had never shown him any contempt or hostility. Even when the hero defined his magic, he continued to study to remain an important member of the family. And if you think about it that way, it seemed like he was estranged from them anyway. Sherry hoped her brother understood and realized he hadn't said anything to her Lu, and boy was he sorry. Her sister had called her brother a fool, and despite all these misunderstandings, she had come a long way. Ashto looked sadly at his sister and smiled and admitted that it was his fault. Sherry hugged her brother sincerely for the first time in a long time. Although Silmeria didn't know all the details, but for some reason she felt better. Muti agreed with her and was glad that things were finally getting better. 3 days had passed since the girls arrived in the village. Sherry's wounds had healed and the hero hoped she was no longer in pain. He asked if she had any strange sensations, but Sherry replied that everything was fine. Besides, she didn't want to lie in bed forever and asked Ashto to show them the village. The hero should have thanked the ogre family and asked the girls to follow him. Meanwhile, the ogre family was butchering the carcass of a huge bull. The little boy did not hesitate to break off the horn of the animal. Just at that moment the heroes came in and Ashto was disgusted to see how such a small boy could break off the horn with ease with his small hands. The boy was glad to see their doctor. The ogres recognized the girls, and Muti thanked them for their help, for if it had not been for them, she and Sherry would have parted with their lives long ago. But they seemed all right now and Muti thanked them profusely. The sister asked her husband not to be embarrassed and apologized for him. As they surmised, he was not used to being thanked. The son noticed that his father was all red, and the hero felt embarrassed at the mere thought of the strongest demonic ogre in this village blushing. The children ran up to the girls and expressed their joy that they were now here. Sherry was surprised at the large size of the farm, and even the hero wondered when they had managed to expand it so much. Elrin came out to meet them and asked the hero who was with him. The lad said it was his little sister Sherry and his childhood friend Muti, whom he had told her about earlier. The girl exclaimed that this was great and she was glad that they were okay. Looking at Sherry, the elf girl thought she didn't look much like a hero and the guy asked her not to be so rude. Ashto thought that Sherry looked like him. After all, she was his little sister. Elrin didn't even realize how caring her brother was. Sherry grabbed the hero's hand and asked him to shut up. After that, the girl smiled and expressed her gratitude to the elven woman for taking care of her brother. Muti also introduced herself to the Elirin. The elfess was very pleased and gave her name. She was pleased to see them in the village and Muti thought she was quite beautiful. But the hero thought she was only so when she smiled. In that case, the hero suggested that they find August and the rest of the older dwarves. The elves informed the hero that August had gone off to procure materials, and the lad decided to introduce them to the girls another time. Sherry and Muti were amazed that there were elder dwarves, higher elves, and even demonic ogres in the Silver Cat clan. They had a very unusual village where many legendary races had gathered. Oberstein was far more amazing than they could have imagined. The hero decided to ask the girls just in case, one last time, did they really want to live here. Sherry didn't doubt it and said her ice magic would come in handy here, and Muti wanted to try making desserts. The hero laughed and thanked the girls. Hero was pleased to welcome them into the village and Sherry thanked her brother for welcoming them. And while they were talking about it, Sherry suggested that the Mutis move into the hero's room. Hearing his sister's words, Ashto blushed. The next morning Muti decided to take a walk around the village. Sherry was already in the company of the ogre children and was pleased to find her friend here. Muti decided to bring snacks for everyone and the ogres thanked her for the treats. They were delighted that the girl always made delicious pastries. The girl suggested that in that case she try making snacks with their grapes. Their father came up to them and told Sherry that they had heard a rumor that an extension had been made to the warehouse. Sherry was excited because they would need her help there to use the ice magic inside. Sherry told Moody that they would see each other soon and left. It had been a month since they had moved here and everyone around them was pretty nice. Moody was doing a lot more useful work now. As she closed her book, the girl thought about the fact that she was slowly getting used to life here and wished she could somehow thank everyone for accepting them. But she didn't possess any really useful magic like ice magic, as opposed to Sherry, which allowed her to keep the storehouse cold. And there was no way she could make all sorts of unusual snacks without the right utensils. While she was thinking about this at the door, someone knocked. It was Maya, who apologized for the intrusion and told the girl that she had brought her tea. The girl only remembered that she should have added the tea leaves first. She felt embarrassed and Moody laughed. Moody thanked Maya for the very tasty tea, but the girl thought she just wanted to cheer her up. She was frustrated that she was so slow at making tea, but Moody patted her on the head, telling her that it was no big deal. She was sure that with time Maya would brew it faster. The girl sat down next to her and smiled. She wondered if it was true that they were so important to Mr. Ashto. After all, the Lord had been furious when she and another mistress arrived in the village, but he seemed pleased when it was decided that everyone would live together. This was all true, and Moody admitted that Ashto meant a lot to her too. He seemed to care a great deal about her and Sherry, and Meyer exclaimed that she knew it. Meyer exclaimed that in that case she was important to her too, and anyone who was important to the master was important to her too. Moody was touched by Maya's words and she thanked her for everything by stroking the girl's head. This was exactly what the second daughter of the Atwaite family looked like. She seemed rather ordinary compared to her older sister Lunamaria. Her magical powers and sword skills were also quite mediocre. People compared her to the second son of the Estrella family. It was also rumored that their eldest son Ludger was close to Lady Lunamaria. In their opinion, the talented individuals should have gotten along well. From his childhood, he was taught to humiliate Moody long before they even met. A child from a higher ranking family than the Atwaites was in the same situation as her. The girl thought that he must have suffered even more than her. Her sister Lunamaria and the eldest son of the family Estrella Ludger were of the same age. The origins of their families were relatively similar, which allowed them to bond. One day Lunamaria was being congratulated on her birthday and the guy complimented her on how beautiful she looked in that outfit. The girl asked him to stop and confessed that she was embarrassed to wear such a thing. At that time, Moody sat silently on a bench, aloof from everyone, and waited for it to end. She thought that even if she ran away from home, no one would even notice, but she couldn't do that. At that moment, a boy she didn't know walked past her, who turned out to be the main character. They looked at each other in surprise and at the same time said whose family they belonged to. Afterwards, having a little chat. As it happened, they got along very well and have been together all the time ever since. The boys would run away from home and play in the city or travel to the mountains with Ashta's younger sister, Sherry. Then they could live like all normal children. All this lasted until at the age of 15 they learned of their magical talent. After the hero got his talent for nature, he plunged headlong into his studies. After that, he did not leave home very often. As for Moody, she had a talent for explosion magic. As soon as people found out about it, they began to shun her. Blast magic was one of the most important abilities in the mage army. In the blink of an eye, her family began to treat her completely differently. She had to develop her magical abilities and then she could become as powerful as the Ice Princess Sherry. That is what her father had told her. However, this meant that she had to be trained in magic capable of serious destruction and killing lots of people. Moody couldn't do that, so people's attitudes toward her deteriorated dramatically. They talked about how she had been blessed with such magnificent magic, but all she could do was entertain with useless magic tricks. Still, her relatives thought she could be useful and decided to marry her off to the eldest son of the Estrella family. The girl opened her eyes and could not realize when she had managed to fall asleep. She seemed to be dreaming of the distant past and Maya was also sleeping on her lap. Looking out the window, Moody noticed that it was already dark. Without all those huge buildings like the manor, the sky was much better to see, and then a great idea occurred to her. After a while, people began to gather in the middle of the village. Elrin wondered what was going on, but the hero was clueless and said that Moody had something to show them. She suddenly asked everyone to gather in the square after dusk. The girl went out to the people and apologized for gathering them at such a late hour. Today was exactly 1 month since they had arrived in the village, and she had gathered them all today to repay her gratitude. Moody admitted that she wasn't much more capable, but she wanted to thank them with something that only she was capable of. With those words, the girl raised her magic wand. She pointed her wand upwards and offered a view of intangible beauty by releasing a shot into the sky. People watched with interest the little spark that shot into the sky. A moment later, it formed a magnificent large fireworks display that amazed everyone around. Mesmerized by this beauty, people looked up into the sky and thought it was a beautiful sight. Meyer exclaimed that it was a real beauty, and the leader of the dwarves laughed at such a marvelous spectacle. None of them would have thought that this girl could create something so beautiful. It seemed to the elven girl that the fireworks looked like flowers, and they had never seen such a beautiful night sky. That was exactly what the Moody spell was, a sparkling flame. The hero had previously heard that she had invented her own spell when she couldn't learn all sorts of cruel magic, but he couldn't think that she would use explosion magic in such a way. The dwarf asked to bring drinks, for they needed to have a drink or two to this magnificent light show. He suggested that they enjoy this girl's gift well. The guy approached the girl and Moody asked Ashto for his opinion. Ashto smiled and said it was very beautiful. So Moody and Ashto watched the fireworks together in silence until it was over. The next day came, and Sherry wished Moody a good morning. Sherry had already prepared milk and eggs for her friend, and Moody thanked her. Sherry felt she should have thanked her, for she brought them tasty treats every day. The children of the ogres were glad to see Moody. The children asked to bring more of that puffy stuff and round crunchy sweetness. So it had been 2 months since the arrival of Moody and Sherry. Sherry used ice magic to cool the refrigerators in all the houses. This allowed the residents to keep food frozen. Cold drinks were incredibly popular with those who worked away from home, and Moody's made baked goods and distributed them to the residents. The children just loved these baked goods, and the hero would often see them begging for more. The hero's humble cottage became much livelier with the 5 of them, along with Ilmiria and Maya, who were his servants at the time. The house seemed too big for him at first, but now everything was perfect. Every day was filled with radiant smiles, but something still bothered Ashto. The hero examined the barrels in the middle of the night and decided that it would be much easier to use whiskey instead of wine. But that was hard to imagine, since everyone drank too much of it every day. Silmeria came up behind him, asking what was the matter. The hero thought about experimenting, but the girl didn't quite understand him. The lad was sure she was aware that they were totally short of booze. Ashto picked up a large barrel and set it on the ground. The oldest dwarves and the highest elves were talking about running out of alcohol, and the liquor they make in the village was not ready yet. But since it was made from natural ingredients, the guy thought that his growth spell might have helped. No matter what anyone said, everyone was working very hard to bring the village up from its knees, and the lad decided to try out the spells on his barrels. Silmeria understood and told the lord that it was a great idea, but she didn't understand why he would do it secretly in the night. Ashto didn't want to make a lot of noise like he did in the vineyard. Besides, even if it worked, he had no idea how it would turn out, and the girl asked to stay and watch it. Ashto of course didn't mind and let her stay. The guy took his magic wand and used growth magic. After using the magic, the hero was shocked, for the barrel itself began to grow. Ashto felt as if the wine had been aged for 10 years, and the Silmeria offered the lord to taste it. The hero was surprised at how quickly she got a glass for him and opened the cask. The girl didn't know what to say in reply, and the guy thought it was sheer madness. Its smell and color were definitely of a higher quality than all the wines they had. Silmeria watched Asht with interest as he took a couple of sips. His cheeks flushed, and he said it was soft but with sourness. It also had the distinct aroma of the cask going on. It was hard to describe it, but overall it seemed good to him. He held out a glass to the maid and wanted her opinion. Silmeria took a couple of sips and a shiver ran through her whole body. The girl blushed and told the master that his experiment had succeeded. The boy could not believe that he had achieved the result so quickly, and the next day he decided to use the growth on all the barrels in the village. Elrin had never imagined that Ashto could do something so impressive and decided to go ahead with his plans. But the hero did not understand at all what plans she was talking about. Apparently, she had blabbed and couldn't say it yet. Meanwhile, the dwarfs shouted that they needed to build more drink warehouses, and then, a few days later, a new guest arrived in their village. It was a clan of hellhounds who were happy to meet the hero. Ashto had not expected to see such a clan here, and people assumed that Ashto was the mayor of the place. Earlier, the hero had thought that the hellhounds had disappeared from the kingdom years ago and he had never met them. He took Sherry and Baljamir as bodyguards, but they didn't seem dangerous at all. The clan leader asked the lord to let them take shelter in this place and bowed in respect. They had heard that this village was home to rare species that had nowhere to go. There were demonic ogres here, and there were also high elves, elder dwarves, and even a cat clan. The leader of the hounds said that a terrible epidemic had hit their village. The rest of the hellhounds had died, and they were wandering around different lands looking for a safe haven for their family. The boy asked him to take his time and asked him what made them think there were rare species gathered here that had nowhere else to go. The clan leader said that there were rumors about it. It was said that some person was single-handedly collecting rare species to create a village and develop this land, and it was like an Ashta village. The hero had no idea who could spread such rumors. The leader of the hounds knelt down and begged the hero to let them take shelter in this village. Ashto was fine with that and allowed them to stay. But in this village, everyone had their own responsibilities, so if they wanted to live here, they had to help. The leader of the hounds gladly agreed and said that their men were excellent hunters and the women were excellent sewers. They could also do other things as well, if only they were assigned to them. The hero pondered and instructed the men to go after the Balgold, and Sherry took charge of the women. Sherry also decided to ask the muties for help and offered to talk to the dwarves about building a house for the newcomers. Ashton noticed a child behind the hound girl that he was frightened and decided to find out who he was. The hounds introduced Laura and said she was quite unique. Their clan always had 3 children each, but Laura was an only child. Children who had no brothers or sisters were incredibly rare among hellhounds, and Laura was special. As it turned out, her parents were taken by an epidemic. Maya noticed the baby's legs shaking and decided she was in pain. The hound girl didn't even know about it and asked Laura about it. Maya asked her not to worry, for the Lord could heal her right away. In that case, they decided that the Laura would stay here while they were shown the neighborhood, and the girl thanked them for their help, asking them to take care of the child. Ashton noticed that the girl had the same symptoms as after touching the poisonous herbs. But apparently Laura was in a lot of pain and the situation was much worse. Guy thought she would have to rest at home for a few days. The hero soothed the crying girl, saying that everything would be fine and with proper care, the wound would heal quickly. A mutie walked past them and decided to ask Laura where she was from. Laura was too scared and depressed, and Mutie decided not to touch her. But Maya was of a different opinion and approached the girl closely, asking where she was from. Mutie was disturbed by Maya's abruptness, but Laura answered her that they were from the northern part of the forest, and it took 3 months to get to that place. Maya was delighted, and replied that she was not from the forest. She and her mum were then very upset when their former master died. Silmeria and the other cats were very kind, but before they were here they had a very hard time. But their new master was very nice and always smiled at them. Maya had fun with him every day, so she was sure that Laura would have fun with them too. Laura didn't quite believe it, but Maya took her hands and exclaimed that she was sure of it. The girl confessed that everyone had brothers and sisters and she didn't. Everyone was kind to her, but she was the only child in the group and could not help them in any way. She could not even talk to her brothers or sisters, and Maya suggested that in such a case they talk to her all the time. Moya suggested she play a lot when Laura was better, and the girl smiled for the first time. Mutie was glad to see a smile on her and she felt calmer. Cotton and hemp fields, a silk farming house and a fabric workshop. In a matter of days, their cloth production grew thanks to the hellhound girls who had joined them. They sewed not only ordinary clothes for the residents, but also a bunch of different costumes. At the same time, the men came to the Balgold daily and their hunting abilities improved over time. And it started with a big tree, but the village started to grow around it and things were going too well. In time they had royal sheep and the size of them was enormous. The hellhounds were delighted with the royal sheep, for they looked very impressive. Their eyes lit up at the thought of how much of the best wool they could shear from them. Besides, they still had dozens of such wonderful sheep, and it was too good to be true. The hero didn't understand how the girl wasn't frightened. The head of the ogres decided to ask the hero what was wrong, for earlier Ashto had said that they needed wool, so they had brought them here. The hero did say that it would be a good idea to get wool since they already had hemp, but apparently that was too much. Balgold quizzed the Ashto not to worry about them attacking the village, since the sheep were already trained. But the hero had only asked for 1 small sheep, and he had brought him a whole 100. The lad also asked the oldest dwarves to build a vast enclosure where the king's sheep could be kept. But to be honest, Ashto didn't think he could handle it all. Then the hero decided to pay a visit to the greenhouse. There he noticed that things were not as bad as they might seem. But it seemed to him that there were not enough vegetables. Shella agreed with him, but since they had the opportunity, she would really like to grow those herbs and plants that she normally wouldn't be able to. No sooner had she finished speaking than the guy was again surprised by her presence here. Ash's heart seized up and the girl smiled, saying that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. She kept scaring him by popping up as if out of nowhere. But since it was bothering him, the girl decided to give him some new and interesting plants. Ash had some very strange images in his mind and Shella laughed, asking him not to worry so much. She handed him the plants and told him that after all the older dwarves had built him a new greenhouse so he could try growing them there. The girl was sure he would like them and winked. No sooner had Ashto asked her a question than the shells were gone. So a few hours passed in the new greenhouse where the boy planted the seedlings from the Shella. It seemed to him that this was going to work. True, the color of the plants seemed rather ghastly to him. Even so, the seedlings actually looked okay, but such leaves and stems Ashto had never seen before. Of course, he could have used the growth, but conceded that it could have turned into something dangerous and out of control. Rising to his feet, the hero decided that he might as well try a little growth on a single sapling. The hero took his magic wand and decided to be careful enough not to let it grow right away. After that, he used growth magic on the plant. Ashto was amazed at how delicious the plant smelled, plus it had beautiful pink flowers. The hero was mesmerized by how beautiful and lovely these flowers bloomed. He was going to grow them just a little bit, but it seemed that it was already fully grown. The fruit on the tree was quite large and smelled very delicious. Ashto thought they were fruit. They looked like peaches, and Shella was surprised that they had already had time to grow. This time the boy was not surprised at her appearance and asked, "What kind of tree is this?" The girl smiled and explained that it was a peach prunus or heavenly peach tree. That was the name of the legendary fruit bred by the magicians many years ago. Shella had obtained this seedling long ago, in the time when mages were still called celestials. She also said that if you left this fruit in water overnight, you could get a naive flavored wine, which interested Ashto. And of course, they could just be eaten raw. Shella offered to pick some for them and Ashto agreed. The boy looked at the boiling cauldrons, wondering if wine would really come out of it. Shella could no longer wait for tomorrow and offered the hero a taste of the fruit. Ashto didn't even know how to eat them, so Shella suggested he just slice them. Shella noticed that he was pretty good at it, and the boy told her that he used to do that a lot when he lived in the kingdom. After slicing the peaches, he decided that was fine enough. Shella took a piece and asked the hero to open his mouth, and Ashto wanted her to stop doing that. Besides, the girl was the first to give him the seedling, so she should have been the first to try it. That was true, but in the end he helped the sapling grow and Shella forcibly forced a peach into the guy's mouth. He got embarrassed and Shella thought it was delicious. After swallowing the peach, the guy noticed that it was quite fresh and soft. It had a very juicy and sweet nectar that spilled over the mouth just by biting into it. It was very tasty, and the hero didn't even know there was such a fruit in the world. Shella was happy to hear that. Apparently, this tree only grew here and nowhere else. The hero found it hard to believe that it was so rare, and the girl suggested that he feed the leaves with tree water. Shella smiled and said that something good would happen if he did. Ashto could only imagine everyone drinking bowls of wine from the heavenly peach. The next day, the main character opened the barrel to see what they got out. The leader of the dwarves and Elrond decided to make sure it was wine, and the guy told them that it was made from a heavenly peach. They didn't know what it was, but after looking at the fruit in front of them, they decided that was it, as the hero had previously said it could be used to make a delicious peach wine. Ashto took a chance to taste it and licked his lips and said that it was just the thing. Elrond's eyes lit up and she asked him to give her some too. The leader of the dwarves did not want to give in to her and a fight ensued between them for supremacy. The gnome exclaimed that wine and gnomes have always gone hand in hand. Eventually everyone was able to taste the wine, which was very tasty, sweet and light even for the girls. Silmeria smiled and said that it was just a great flavor, but one had to be careful not to get drunk. The leader of the hounds was interested in the big tree and asked the hero if it was possible to eat the fruit from that tree. Ashto replied that the fruit was very tasty, and the lad asked him to pick 2 fruits. The hero was of course fine with that, and offered to share those peaches with the steel hellhounds, to which the leader was very happy. Silmeria lit up and exclaimed that she wanted to try them too. Immediately, the ogres and dwarves joined in. The ogre sister wanted to take some for her children. In that case, the hero smiled and said that they would pick all the fruit. Eventually, the peaches ran out in no time and apparently everyone really liked the fruit. Ashto hoped that they could grow more and the wooden man asked if he wanted more sky peaches. The hero sighed heavily and said that they needed to be more careful as they only had 1 tree. It was unclear to the guy where the tree ran to. The creature bent down to the ground and unearthed small sprouts. At some point these sprouts began to sprout and Ashto saw the grown saplings. And as he realized, these saplings belonged to the celestial peach. It turned out that the leaves were very tasty, so the woodworker made sure there were lots of them. The hero assumed that it was all because he ate the leaves, but tree people shouldn't have had that kind of power, he thought. At this point, a Shella came by and noticed that they had made a bunch of these peach trees. It seemed to her that the wood had grown quite a bit and the guy thought it was from the magic he got from Lady Shell. Shella thought it was nice of her to give away all the fruit, but Ashto had no use for keeping it with her. The girl asked what he was doing and the guy wondered how those tiny saplings were doing. He hadn't used the growth earlier and had completely forgotten about them. It still wasn't clear to him what those saplings were, but even Shella couldn't tell him exactly. Ashto squinted at the girl, hoping they weren't poisonous, but Shella chuckled and told him not to worry about it. But if he was so interested, the Shella had a suggestion for Ashto. She offered to try to use the growth on these little guys and was sure he could use them. The hero was not sure but decided to try and took his magic wand and then used the growths on the sprouts. After a while, the guy became gloomy because the growths did not grow and it was very strange. Shella surmised that they needed more magic. The guy pulled himself together and clenched his fist and said he would give everything he had. In the end, no matter how much he tried, he failed, and he was sorry he wasn't strong enough. Shella laughed and replied that it was okay. She asked to take a closer look, for the sprouts were actually growing. Ashto looked in surprise at the pot with the sprout. The hero didn't understand what was happening, for he had stopped the spell, but for some reason the sprouts were moving strongly. Eventually, strange creatures emerged from them in the form of girls named Mandrake and Arlon. Meanwhile, Moody and Silmeria were making a pie, and Sherry watched with interest. She surmised that this pie made of heavenly peaches, not apples. Moody had earlier lit up with the idea and it came out just perfect. Silmeria said it would be very sweet and was sure that even the adults would like it. Just then the doors of the house opened and the children exclaimed that they were home. Laura and Maya immediately smelled an odor. They wondered what it was, for it smelled very good. They arrived just in time and the girls asked them to come in, wash their hands and sit down at the table. Heavenly peaches were delicious on their own, but they would be even better in baked goods. Nudie wanted to try making compote, jam and even pies with them. She wanted the children to be able to taste all the delicious things they could. Maya exclaimed that she was done and Sherry asked them to take from their plates and cups and raid the dish. At that moment the hero returned and the girls thought he was just in time. Sherry and Nudie went out to meet him, telling him about the cake they had baked. But suddenly they fell silent and looked at Ashto's feet. The girls asked a question about the children that were holding the hero's leg. The two little girls said they were Mandrake and Arlon. The boy couldn't find the words and said that was exactly what they were seeing. But the girls weren't sure what they were seeing. A few hours earlier, the lad had first met these girls and Shella said that apparently it worked. They were legendary herbs called Mandrake and Arlon. Ashto did see leaves sticking out of their heads and once again tried to remember those names. Then he was struck as if by lightning and the hero decided that the Shella was joking with him. The girl smiled and said that was exactly what he was thinking. Elixirs were prepared from these leaves, which meant that the hero could prepare the legendary medicine. The elixir was a legendary medicine that could cure any wounds and diseases. It was said to have been created by one of the 7 legendary dragons, the Dragon of Wisdom. There were only 2 such medicines in the entire world, and one of them was kept in the treasury of the kingdom of the Great Balog. The other was stored in the Dragon Road Kingdom, a country as great as the Great Balog Kingdom. No one knew the exact recipe and of course, being only the son of a nobleman, there was no way for the hero to know either. Apparently, the leaves on these girls' heads were part of the ingredient. The girls clung to the hero's legs as if they had found their father. The hero didn't know what to do and asked for help from the Shella, but the Shella only laughed at him. As it turned out, the girls thought he was their father, for his magic had given them life, and now they were connected to his mana just like wood. Yet the hero was not their father. At least, he thought so. The girl explained that they only needed water and sunshine to live, but they could eat like a normal creature. She offered to give them some heavenly peaches when she had the chance and wishing the hero good luck, decided to leave. Shella ended up leaving the confused Ashto alone with the Mandrake and Alron, who were madly pleased with him. It just so happened that the 2 girls popped out after he used growth magic on the saplings that Lady Shella had given him. And now, Sherry realized he had become their father, but the hero once again said he was not their father. He tried to change the subject and said that the pie made by Moody was very good. But the question was where these girls should live, for there was no more room in this house. The hero once again filled the girls and that he was not their real father, and Moody suggested that they needed a room. On the ground floor they had a living room, a viewing room and a medicine storage room. The hero thought they could put them in there. There were 5 rooms on the first floor, but they were all occupied. There was another option to put all the children in the Moody room, but they might be cramped with 4 of them. Laura said she was already fully healthy and if they wanted her to, she could ask to join the others. Ashto said that was not what he meant and stroked the girl's head and said that this was also her home. He asked her not to even think about leaving. Usually hellhounds had 3 children each, however Laura was alone and Ashto didn't like it. He was only going to look after Laura until her wounds healed, but now he had a different opinion. Laura and Maya had become very close friends, plus it hadn't been that long since Laura had taken up residence with them. Nudie wanted to ask August to make an extension to the house and suggested that they stay with her for the time being. The girl decided to ask the children if they wanted to go with her and Sherry exclaimed that she was going with them. She hugged the little girls and said that they were real cuties. Sherry also thought that her room was too big for her alone anyway, so they would be fine together. Eventually Sherry and Nudie each took a girl apart and the hero assumed they liked them more than he thought they would. In that case the hero got up from the table and said it was settled. He thanked the girls for their help and Sherry replied that it was no problem as they were very nice. One of the girls had already fallen asleep and Ashto surmised that she was just full. Eventually Mandrake would live with Moody and Alaron with Sherry, and it's been a few weeks since then. Walking around the village, the lad thought that they had recently added a few more buildings as well as older dwarves. They now had as many as 3 wine cellars and a few buildings that were unclear what they were for. But the guy decided not to focus on it. After all, he had entrusted all the buildings to the elder dwarves, so he shouldn't have stuck his nose in it. In addition, the hero had other things to do, and he decided to inspect the leaves of mandrake and allron. Ashto could pick one leaf a day, but he was worried that the girls would be alright. This worried him, though they would give him leaves instantly if he asked them to. They were legendary plants after all, and the guy thought that they would be more mysterious and emit more magic. But they looked like ordinary plants. Anyway, the first thing the hero decided to do was to do some research. No sooner had he opened the textbook than he was startled by a shell that crept up behind him again. From fright, the hero dropped the textbook. He asked her never to scare him again, and the Shella noticed that he was a real cutie. Shella asked him not to worry about the plants and told him that they would grow back. As she had seen, he had already managed to get mandrake and allron leaves. The hero told how they just plucked the leaves off his head and it really scared him. Shella wondered where they were and the boy replied that they were playing near the greenhouse with Maya and the others. Still, they were still kids and Ashto thought that at their age they would be better off having fun than hanging around him. Shella smiled, seeing that she hadn't made the mistake of trusting him to take care of those plants. She also looked around the village, noticing that life was just as bustling. It seemed to her that everything was going well, and in fact everything here was built thanks to the elder dwarves. Shella said that it was the village that kept growing and trying to touch the boy's chin, asked him to keep working hard. At some point Shella kissed the guy on the cheek and said they would see each other later. The guy blushed, having no idea why the Shella was even coming here. Turning his head, he noticed a book on the table and decided that Lady Shella had forgotten it. Ashto picked it up and it seemed to him that this book was quite old. Without thinking long, the hero opened the book to read it. There he found a simple recipe for an elixir that described all the ingredients. It included mandrake leaves, allron leaf, philosopher's stone, nectar of immortality, unicorn horn, scales of an ancient dragon, a branch of the tree of Yggdrasil, and a golden cauldron. The guy tiredly threw back his head and exhaled. He shouted at the book that it wasn't an easy recipe at all, and it was all legendary stuff. But it was just what he needed, and Ashto thought he was being played a joke on. He had no idea where to get the scales of an ancient dragon and thought of this book. It must have had incredible magical powers. He flipped through its pages, but the book did not end. It had the ingredients of other medicines as well, and even described the places where they could be obtained. The boy smiled, thinking that he was lucky to be blessed so. Mentally, he thanked Lady Shell for this and decided to look at the ambrosia that could grant eternal youth. The hero had also read about an anti-soul incense that was capable of raising the dead. It was hard to believe that this was true. Eventually, Ashto did not notice the fact that he had fallen asleep and the sun was almost hidden behind the horizon. When he opened his eyes, he heard Muti calling him. She didn't like him sleeping in a place like this. Besides, it was time for supper. The hero looked around, not believing that it was quite late, and wondered when he had managed to sleep. The girl remarked that he should have got rid of this bad habit of being completely immersed in his studies. But that was all he was, and Ashto apologized for it. But Muti didn't see it as a big deal, and she was glad to know that he hadn't changed too much. Besides, now she was always near him and could call on him at any time. The boy decided that this was true and an awkward pause came between them. Suddenly there was a shout that asked the two of them to hurry up and come here, for dinner was already getting cold. Muti apologized to Sherry and said they were on their way. She called Ashto come with her and the boy left the recipe book on the table. The main character wondered where he went after helping him with the greenhouse. He looked at the huge royal sheep on which the girls were lying. Strangely enough, it looked quite comfortable. The boy decided that they were almost finished and thought that he hadn't paid much attention lately to the fact that the houses were so much bigger. Smiling, the hero thought that he hadn't been outside for a long time. All this time he had been doing nothing but reading Lady Shella's book and studying. Along the way, Ashto met a family of ogres. He wished the Balgold good morning and assumed the ogre was going hunting. The man said he needed to check the traps he had set yesterday. Ashto was surprised and didn't realize how big the Balgold was as he stood in front of him. Unlike normal ogres, demonic ogres were better at resisting poisons and their skin was so thick that it couldn't be cut by a normal blade. The men had incredibly strong arms and the women had incredibly strong legs. It was because of their magnificent abilities that they were often called the Demon King's kin, and so many people avoided them, but for their village, they were indispensable hunters. In addition, everyone in the village knew how kind they were. The ogre's son decided to show off his axe to the hero and Ashto noticed that the axe was really cool. As it turned out, it was his dad's old axe and now he wanted to hunt with it from today. His sister said that the Shinna was still quite excited since yesterday. But the lad said she was no better, for she herself had been talking non-stop about how she would use her mother's double blades. The girl pulled her brother's cheek and asked him to shut up, for it wasn't necessary to tell the mayor. The girl was glad to see Ashto and said he should go hunting with them. Their mother told the children that Ashto was a very busy man, but the girl insisted. Norma thought that if he stayed at home all the time, mushrooms would grow out of his head and he should have gone with them. The boy decided that she thought he was a real recluse, but it was true that for the last few days he hadn't been anywhere but the greenhouse and his own house. Eventually, Ashto agreed to go with them and Norma was overjoyed. The hero had absolutely no idea where they were and Balgold said they were already at their destination. He pointed ahead where the trap was set and Ashto was speechless. Their trap was clearly larger than a normal trap and it was a real big hole in which a huge bear had fallen. The brother told the Norm that they had caught the prey and the girl exclaimed that he was right. The children thought their prey was small enough, but the hero was shocked, saying that this animal could swallow a whole house. The carcass was big enough that the hero thought it would take 100 men to lift it here. It was a completely different scale to him. The mother ordered the Shinha down, and Ashto didn't understand what it was for. The Shinha rolled down the slope with ease. The boy told his father that he was on his way, but the hero did not understand what he was going to do. The boy asked the Balgold what his son was doing, and Ashto lifted the carcass of the bear. After the boy took the carcass off the peak, he threw it into the air. The huge bear flew right over the surprised Ashto. The ogres noticed that this carcass was quite fresh and had died recently. The blood was still warm and it was perfect. The guy felt really stupid for being the only one panicking around here. The ogre family decided that they needed to cut it up, but Ashto didn't realize what that was for. Balgold started cutting up the carcass and the hero asked about what they were doing. Shinha replied that if they cut up the game here, a lot of blood would spill around. Thus, its odor would attract more of the big beasts who would come here in droves. This news alarmed the hero. Suddenly a rustle was heard from behind the bushes and turning round, the hero saw a pair of huge wolves. The boy was glad to see them and grabbed his axe. Chopping their carcasses, he said they would hunt them all at once. Ashto had nothing to do but watch it all from the sidelines. Balgold noticed that the hero had turned white and hoped he was alright. The ogre apologized for managing to scare him. As you could see, this type of hunting is common for them. Ashto lay down on the ground and said that he was fine. Because everyone around them was so hardworking and kind, the guy had almost forgotten that they were in Oberstein. It was a forest of monsters where no man would dare to set foot. The boys again heard some rustling in the bushes and surmised that there were more monsters here. But suddenly a little girl with horns on her head fell out of the bushes. Ashto noticed dark skin and white hair on her. Also, her horns were a slightly different shape and he surmised that she was of the ogre race. He decided to inquire about this Balgold, which confirmed his hunch. The girl cried and the hero decided to find out if she was alright. Apparently she had hurt her knee and Ashto wanted to look at the wound. At this point the ogre family looked amongst themselves. The boy applied the medicine to her leg and asked her not to touch it until it was absorbed. The girl was silent and the hero noticed that she was very tiny. He surmised that she might have fallen behind her parents. Ashto tried to find out where she came from and the girl pointed towards the forest. Suddenly a tall, muscular man appeared directly in front of Ashto and the hero thought he was asleep. The girl rushed to her daddy and Ashto's jaw dropped. The man took his daughter in his arms and the girl told him how she had hurt herself, but the man fixed her up. The boy felt uncomfortable as he felt the man's cold and hard stare on him. He hoped that this ogre would turn out not to be evil. Ashto dared to ask him a question and inquire about whether he was really a demonic ogre. The man replied briefly that he was, and his voice seemed surprisingly soft to the lad. The hero asked them to wait a moment and turned to the Balgold. They were demonic ogres too, after all, and the hero wondered what they were doing here. He noticed a strange expression on the Balgold's face, and the man admitted that he had never met anyone of his race before. It was almost as if he was worried. Ashto hoped this would lead to nothing bad and decided to explain himself. He said that their little girl had been hurt, but their village was not far away. The hero offered to walk with them so he could finish her treatment and stay for a cup of tea at the same time. Of course, the lad didn't insist, and the man was surprised that a human could live with demonic ogres. The hero mentioned that they also have high elves, elder dwarves, and many other races. The man replied that they have a family and if they don't mind, they will bring them along. Apparently, the Ashto had succeeded and he did not mind. The guy introduced himself, also introducing their hunters Balgold, his wife Armo and children. The girl called herself Isla and Ashto was comfortable that the ogre's daughter liked him. The ogre called himself by the name of Daimdi and Ashto was pleased to meet him. The hero noticed that the man was quite calm. The rest of their family approached them, hoping that their father had found Isla. The father introduced his son Karinji and his wife Niam to the heroes. Balgold and the hero asked to follow them to the village. During the whole time they were walking back, Ashto felt awkward and everyone around them was silent. He decided to defuse the situation and thanked the man for his help. He also said that they have very good alcohol in their village, but apparently this did not interest the Daimdi in any way. The guy switched to Karinji, hoping he wasn't having a hard time, and then to Shinha. Guy replied Ashto that it was alright. And still he was maximally embarrassed. Daimd became convinced that the hero was the mayor of the village and everything became clear to him. He realized that Ashto was the man rumored to be the one supposedly collecting rare races and building a village for them. The hero, of course, wanted to know where he had heard this. Daimd was unaware that there were also demonic ogres living here. The boy apologized for his rudeness and decided to find out what had happened to them. They had been banished from the village just as the Balgold's family had been. In that case, Ashto offered their family to live with them. They had many vacant houses where the Balgold and his wife were. Daimd didn't know what to answer, for he had never met other demonic ogres before, so he didn't know how to communicate with them. But there was nothing complicated about it, and the boy offered to communicate as usual. Ashto smiled and asked Isla for her opinion. The girl was in complete agreement with him. She seemed a very friendly little girl to the guy, and Ashto decided to give them at least some opportunity. He invited Isla to come with him and called Norma. Ashto introduced Isla to Norma, saying that she too was a demonic ogre and they would now live together with them. He asked the Norm to befriend her, and the Norm was unopposed. Of course, she was a little nervous, but the hero knew that everything would be fine because she had previously befriended Maya and Lara. The little girl held out her hand and introduced herself as Isla. Norma shook her hand and told her her name. Ashto invited Daimd to look at them and said that the girls were already friends. The lad knew that any little thing could be an opportunity and suggested to Daimd that he invite Balgold to have a drink with him. They were nice, and the hero was sure his wife and Kirinji would get along fine with them. Ogre smiled and decided it was okay to give it a try. In the end, Ashto didn't understand why it had come to this. After all, they were just supposed to be having a chat. A real fight broke out between the two heads of the ogre family, and Ashto didn't understand how things could have turned out like this. Elrin was actively cheering them on at this time. A few hours before the demonic ogres clashed, a mate initiation ceremony was to be held. According to Ashto, it was an important ritual among the ogre clans. Balgold would like to perform this ritual with Daimd, unless of course the latter was against it. The boy made sure that Daimd was okay with it and decided to get down to business. He was a little worried, but they seemed to get along just fine. It was great that they had decided to do a ritual to bond, but the hero didn't quite understand what had happened to the Nut Gallery. Elrin was happy to see the reclusive Ashto and greeted him. Ashto did not consider himself a recluse, and the Elfa said he was a liar. Besides, it had been a long time since she had seen him. She decided to remind him that their last conversation had been about the brewery and suggested that Ashto go outside more often. Still, it was not clear to the hero why such a crowd had gathered around the abattoir. As was already known, the Balgold and the newcomer were going to hold a ritual of initiation into friendship. The elf's eyes lit up, for any ritual between ordinary ogres was a sight to behold, and here were demonic ogres. Of course, everyone wanted to see it. Finally, the boys saw the two ogres, and Ashto did not understand what was the initiation ritual that attracted so much attention. Ashto was not sure but decided to ask Elmina what exactly happens during the initiation ritual. But it was obvious to the elven woman, and the ogres of course had to fight among themselves. The boy's jaw dropped as Balgold and Daimd broke the ground beneath him. Elmina only cheered at such a sight, as did everyone else. The ogres struck each other mercilessly and punched each other in the face. Balgold confessed that he had not had blood on him since he was a boy, and Daimd answered him in kind. Two powerful ogres clutched at each other's arms, and neither wanted to give way. The hero got goosebumps at the mere sight and the terrifying aura that emanated from the two of them. He could not believe that this was what an ogre's initiation ritual might look like. Eventually, the battered ogres shook hands, and Balgold told his new friend that they had some delicious beer. He offered Daimd a drink, and Daimd accepted. There was the most real party in the village, and everyone was going to drink until morning. Thus the whole village welcomed the newcomers, and night fell. Norma and Isla got along immediately. Meanwhile, Nema and Armo performed their ritual and became close friends. Shinha and Kirinji also bonded and became like brothers to each other. The older brother told Shinha how he pretended to let the dragon eat himself, but in reality he was turning his insides into a giant mess. Shinha was delighted, but Ashto thought it was rather bloodthirsty. A few days later, the leader of the Hellhounds said that they had finished building another building. It was a construction that took them a surprisingly long time. The dwarves said that they would be sure to celebrate it with an opening ceremony. The leader gave up cutting up the game they had caught to watch it. Since Daimd and his family had joined them, they had only had more prey. The hero realized that the two demon ogre families were hunting like crazy and competing with each other. They needed to expand the warehouses or they would run out of room so soon, and the guy decided to talk to the dwarves after the opening. Looking at the new construction, the hero was surprised because it looked like a nobleman's estate, which was decorated surprisingly simply. Ashto had never seen such buildings before. Elmina asked Ashto to come over, and the hero asked her about the building. He thought it was another brewery, but the brewery was next to a warehouse. By the way, they had already built the fourth of them, and Ashto was scared to think how many more they wanted to build. The dwarf was surprised that their mayor wasn't aware of it, and Elrin apologized for him since their mayor was always sitting at home. These words so pierced the hero through. August replied that the elder dwarves had worked hard to create this work of art. The hero only cared that everyone talked about him like that, and the elfess suggested that he just go out more often. As it turned out, this huge building was the village bathhouse. Ashto was surprised, but remembered that earlier they had bathed in basins of hot water. But even in the royal capitals, the baths were not so large, and August suggested that the mayor start the celebration. August asked the boys to bring them here and showed the hero the signs. There was a men's bathhouse, a women's bathhouse, and the mayor's bathhouse. The boy didn't realize what it was. He only knew the men's and women's baths, and Elrin replied that he had a personal bath. The hero decided to find out more, and the girl said that on the right was the men's, on the left the women's, and in the middle his. The dwarf smiled and told the hero that he would do them a great honor if he put up these signs at the entrance. It seemed to the lad that the mayor's bath was too much, but no one listened to him. Elrin motioned for him to hurry up and go on ahead. Even though the hero was indeed the mayor, but his own bathhouse was too. Ashto decided that he really should have interacted with everyone more. He couldn't let them treat him any differently and took pains to put up a sign to the mayor's bathhouse. The elfess shouted to all the people that from today they could all use the bathhouse, to which everyone was glad. In the meantime, the girl offered the mayor the use of his personal bath, but Ashto was not thrilled that he would be there alone. Ashto went inside and decided that this bathhouse was clearly not for one person. Meanwhile, the girls had made their way to the women's bath and were already enjoying a hot bath. Hero did not understand what was going on here, because this bath was even more luxurious than in noble estates. First he rinsed himself, after which he climbed into the bathtub itself. The hero felt warm and his tension immediately evaporated. He decided that he could not now return to his former bathless towel life. Living in the village had become more pleasant precisely because of everyone's efforts. Ashto decided that he would have to be sure to thank them. Meanwhile, he sat in his room, studying the plants and saplings. The hero realized that he should have been more involved in the mayor's stuff. But in spite of all this, it was very pleasant, and Scheller replied that he was absolutely right. For a moment there was an awkward pause between them and a pressurized atmosphere. The hero immediately distanced himself from her, saying that she was not allowed to be here. But Shella didn't listen to him, enjoying such a wonderful bath. The guy was about to come out, but the Shella asked him not to panic so much. After all, she didn't want to do anything bad to him. She suggested him to sit down next to her and talk to her. Ashto was uncomfortable and he sat down on the very corner with his back turned to her. Shella inquired if the boy had read the book. The hero clarified that she was talking about the book she had left behind, but now the book was his. Shella said that he could do whatever he wanted with the book. Shella was sure of this, for this book was made from a piece of her body. In it was written down the wisdom and knowledge that was stored in her mind. If the lad wanted to name it, the girl suggested that the book be called The Grimoire of Marshmallow, the knowledge of the Emerald Dragoness. Now the hero understood why there was no end to the pages of this book. But it seemed to him that this book was very important and decided to make sure Shella was sure of it. Shella stood to her feet and asked to make the most of it, for she had given it to Ashto on purpose. In that case, the hero thanked her sincerely for this book. The hero turned his head and could not understand how the girl could appear and disappear instantly. Soon bathhouses became very popular among the residents. Here one could wash away the dirt and relax after a hard day's work and then go home and eat a warm dinner before going to bed. This became a daily norm for the residents. August said that they had an even bigger bathhouse at home, and this crumb they had built was no match. Also, this bathhouse had hot water coming from underground, but the hero did not realize this. The dwarves called it natural hot springs and decided that the lad must have bathed there one day. Ashto imagined with a smile the home of the older dwarves. The next day came and Elrin exclaimed that there was nothing like a good ale after a hot bath. Gradually, they also expanded their fields. They asked the wood to grow more hops and millet so that they could make ale from them. And once everything was ready, all they needed was a short growth spell. Sherry was surprised at the rather large warehouse for the ale. With a bit of Sherry's ice magic, the refreshing cold ale was finally ready. Elrin was amazed that the hero had suddenly become so proactive and responsive. But it was not surprising, for they had built a whole separate bathhouse for him. It would be rude of him to continue sitting in the room after that. Ashto noticed the smirk on Elrin's face. The girl wanted to take a dip in the bath after the ale, but Ashto told her that the ale should have been drunk after the bath and not before. He asked her not to blame him in case she felt ill. And so again the baths became very popular among the inhabitants. Later, Elrin told the lad about a cultural exchange with a village of high elves. The elven girl thought that now was a good time for it, but it was kind of sudden for the hero. Previously, she had been kicked out of the High Elves village because she drank all the secret supplies of the chapter. The girl didn't want to remember that and decided to take their drink to them as an apology. She also thought that while they were there, they could socialize and exchange ideas and goods. The character was not mistaken that Elrin had originally thought of something else. In fact, Elrin had been planning this for a long time. Here they made booze and wine, and the dwarves also made household utensils and furniture, and they could sell all these things to other races and villages living in the forest. It would also help a lot in the development of their village, and they would start with the High Elves village. The elven girl thought that the alcohol here was incredibly delicious, and her grandfather had never tasted wine made from heavenly peaches before. She asked the lad to go with her to the village of the High Elves. The hero didn't understand what they needed the exchange for, as they had more than enough supplies to sell. Ashto assumed her village was far from here, but Elrin thought it was quite close and was weeks away. The village had all kinds of saplings useful to him, and there might even be things there he had never seen before. In that case, it was settled. The hero decided that they would take their booze and peach wine and pay them a visit. This could help them in the development of the village, and also the problem that started with alcohol was to be solved by alcohol. By the way, the guy didn't know that the girl had a grandfather, and Elrin replied that the village elder was her grandfather. He was super old and over 100,000 years old, which the hero found hard to believe. The protagonist decided to double check what they would be taking with them. There were 5 bottles of heavenly peach wine and 5 barrels each of red and white grape wine. Ashto thought that should be enough for them to establish a relationship and asked May to show them the way. The girl smiled and of course agreed, for she knew the way. In the end, almost the whole village gathered to go along with the hero. Elrin reminded the hero that they wanted to do everything quickly and wondered if everything would be alright. They made the road to the elf village in a hurry, though it was rather rough. It was the same path that May and the others had traveled before. They needed to level off the road a bit before they could get the carts and wagons across it. The hero thought he had something for Elrin and held out to her the book that Shelley had given him earlier. The elven girl didn't realize what it was, and the guy said it was a grimoire from Lady Shelley. Ashto was more than confident that he saw a useful spell here. He found something similar and read that if there were trees growing in their path and it would be hard to cut them down, this was the spell for them. They just had to ask politely and the trees would part, making way for them. The heroes decided to recite this spell. Elrin didn't quite understand it and doubted that the heroes could use it to create a passage for them. The book said that they could move the trees out of the way. The boy took the magic wand and said that until they tried it they wouldn't know it. He turned to the tree and the spirits whose roots permeated the land. He asked them to open the way and move the trees. Surprisingly, the spell worked and the trees began to part, creating a clear passage. Sherry exclaimed to her brother that it was cool, and Elrin similarly praised him. By the way, the hero was shocked that it worked. At least now there shouldn't be any problems getting groceries to the elf village. The hero smiled and motioned for everyone to head out. He asked Balgold to pull the wagon and hoped he could handle it, but it was no problem for the ogre. Balgold hefted the wagon as if it were a sack of potatoes and said that he would drag it, so he left his son in charge of eliminating the monsters. Shinha exclaimed that his father could do it, and Ashto did not understand why they would even need a wagon in such a case. Sherry approached her brother and said that nature magic was very impressive and they could do a lot of interesting things with it. Ashto wondered what his father would say when he found out how handy it was. But no one knew about it, and the hero was just glad that he could help the villagers in this way. Sherry told his brother that he sounded like the very real mayor, and the boy asked him to stop teasing him. Anyway, he had to let Sherry read the book, and the lad, without objecting, held out the grimoire to his sister. In other words, this grimoire belonged to Lady Shelley, the Emerald Dragoness. The guy asked his sister to stop, and Sherry did not understand what the matter was, calling this book cursed. Ashto didn't understand what she was doing as she watched her sister clutching the book. Sherry didn't understand what was wrong with this grimoire, for she couldn't even open it. She asked the Shinx to spare a moment and asked him to help her open the book. The boy thought she was joking, but Sherry asked him to look at it himself. Shanka took the book, and no matter how many times he tried to open it, he also failed. The book did not even move, and Sherry exclaimed that it was impossible to open it. Ashto thought that this was a possible feature of the grimoire and it could only be opened by the person to whom Lady Shella had entrusted it. No sooner had the hero taken his book back than the Shinna was already rushing to his father, asking for his help. Later still, the lad took his book back. They were able to ascertain that only he could open it. Those who tried to read the grimoire over his shoulder saw only blank pages. 4 days later, the protagonists were still able to reach the village of the High Elves. Ashto had never seen an elf village before and was impressed. Elrin told the others that permission would be needed before strangers could enter the village, so Balgold and the others needed to wait here. She was about to go in with the other elves to talk to the elder, but Lunara reminded her that she could not enter it either. The girl had managed to forget that she had been banished for 1,000 years, and the second elfess replied that Lunara was right. That was the law of the village, but the girls asked her not to worry. They wanted to negotiate with the elder and simply asked to wait here with the others. The elven girls told the ogre that they had a short distance to go so they could use wind magic to drive the wagon the rest of the way. The hero thought it was too late to ask, but perhaps there was some reason why they should be accompanied by 7 high elves. The girls approached the elf guards and notified them that they had returned. The guard looked at May, Lunara, and everyone else asking where they had been. The girls said they wanted to talk to the elder. Besides, they had brought the man here, hoping that they were okay with it. Seeing the human, the elf was shocked, not knowing what they were even thinking. Nay told him that it just so happened that there was a village a couple of days' walk from here, and this man was its mayor, and he was just incredible. They grew fruits she had never heard of and made the world's most delicious wine from them, so she asked that the mayor be allowed to enter the village with them. The girl recalled the grapes she had brought earlier and asked to let the mayor in, as he had something important to tell the elder. Besides, they made beer and wine an order of magnitude better than theirs, and they just couldn't miss the opportunity to taste their purest and most boozy. Under the girls' pressure, the elf agreed and asked them not to talk at the same time and to stop pushing. The hero became afraid, for they had put the guard in a stupor simply by their numbers. The girl smiled and told the hero that permission was granted. The hero looked around the village and thought it was something beautiful. He had no idea that so many high elves lived here. The other elves noticed the May and wondered where they had been. Ashto surmised that the huge tree in front of them was an Yggdrasil. May reminded them that the first thing they had to do was to see Elmina's grandfather, that is, the village elder. The elfess said that once they gave him what they had brought, she was sure he would be in a good enough mood to forgive her. The girls had no doubt that the elder would definitely like the peach wine, for he adored quality booze, just like Elmina. So everything was going to go smoothly, and the heroes headed towards the elder's house. The elder in the form of a little old man noticed the girls and was glad to see them back. The elven girls apologized to the Dickbeck elder for their long absence, and the old man inquired about Elmina. He hoped the girl had thought about her behavior but quickly forgot about it as soon as he saw the man. The elven women introduced the mayor of Ashto that founded the village in the forest and told him that Elmina also lived there now. The lad wanted to formally greet the elder as a friendly forest dweller, so they brought him here. The hero didn't understand at all what she was talking about, and her friend said that, in truth, she and Lunara had been sent to look after Elmina. Such was the decree of the elder. Dickbeck told the lad that none of them had any thought of starting a new village. The hero decided to find out what about the rest of the high elves and all the favors and support they gave him. It just so happened that some of the young elves found building the village a fun venture, so they snuck up on him. The elder apologized that they had kept all this from the Ashto. Turns out the elder was worried about the Elmina, and in that case, the lad knew what he needed. Ashto bowed and thanked the Dickbeck for meeting him. He told him that Elmina was now living in their village and helping them inordinately, and since she had done much for them to attract new residents to the village and improve the living conditions there, they brought a small gift as a token of their good intentions. Ashto was able to interest the elder and the lad looked at the girls. They held out a bottle to him and the lad asked to taste their wine of heavenly peaches. The elder thought that it just couldn't be and thanked the hero, saying that he was glad to be given such a gift. Dickbeck asked the elf to fetch his cup, into which he poured the wine. Barely tasting it, the elder's eyes immediately opened. He exclaimed that this was simply impossible and asked how it could be. There was no mistaking it, and it was indeed the wine of heavenly peaches. The elder thought it was marvelous, and he had not tasted it for many years. Dickbeck drank the bottle in a gulp and said that it was nothing less than a great wine bestowed upon the worthy by the Emerald Dragoness herself. A shiver ran through the lad as the elder stared and called out to him. With tears in his eyes, the elder clung to the young man and tried to find out how he had managed to obtain this wine. The hero smiled and said that it was one of the goods in his village. The old man immediately began to torture Ashto, asking about the price. He was willing to give anything for it. Before Ashto could answer anything, the old man thought that the hero needed medicinal herbs that only the higher elves could grow. The elder never thought he would taste the greatest of all drinks again. Ashto asked him to calm down in order to discuss things calmly. Thus, in exchange for various fermentation products, including wine made from heavenly peaches from Sir Ashto's village, they, the high elves, were agreed to supply them with certain herbs and young fruit trees. From that day forward, trade relations between them would begin. The elder shook the lad's hand and hoped that this would be the beginning of their long and productive friendship. Ashto agreed with the Dickbeck and looked forward to it. The elder wanted to talk about Elmina, his foolish granddaughter. Though she was a glutton and a drunkard, she had a very good heart, and the elder hoped that she would give him years of happiness by tying their families together and becoming his wife. The hero unknowingly agreed, after which he thought about the elder's words. Ashto apologized and the Dickbeck explained to him that she was still young. She was only 8,974 years old, but one could not worry about that. The elder said that she had already reached the age where she could bear a child. and he thought that with a man like Ashto she should not have any problems. Just then an elven woman came in and notified the elder that she had brought Elmina. Dickback asked that she be invited to join them. Elmina looked at her grandfather with sad eyes and apologized for everything. The elder didn't see it as a big deal. He may have lost his precious storehouse of liquor, but in return, he got a fine wine. The girl smiled and told her grandfather that a lot of water had passed since then. But now the Dickback wanted her to work hard for Sir Ashto, saying that there was no limit to his wife's work. Elmina also did not understand her grandfather's words the first time. Dickback hinted that it was time for her to settle down and that if she married Sir Ashto, it would be a weight off his shoulders. Elmina did not understand what they were talking about and wanted to ask Ashto about everything. But the hero asked her not to look at him like that, for he had not even said a word. Sherry put in her 5 cents and said that his brother already had a wonderful girl named Muty. The hero looked at his sister and asked her not to say anything. Meanwhile, the elf children were admiring the galbald that was waiting for everyone else in the courtyard. Toward nightfall, the protagonist and the elves decided to drink to the bottom of their fortunate acquaintance. Elmina was glad that they had resolved everything, and yet she was still in a lot of pain, but in the end she was able to secure her return. Meanwhile, the elf children were talking to the galbald's son and trying to find out how his father had managed to become so big. The elder considered it true luck to have met Sir Ashto, and the lad thought the same. Dickback was convinced that the hero didn't want to marry his granddaughter after all, but the lad was sure of it and thanked him for the offer. The elder asked if the lad had ever thought of marrying, but again received a negative answer. Eventually, the Dickback calmed down and the hero wanted to ask him about the huge tree of Yggdrasil. He asked permission to examine it closer the next day, and the old man of course did not mind. But there was actually something that was giving them a lot of trouble. The hero surmised that the tree might have been painful, but it turned out not to be so. The elder told them that a monster had recently appeared there gnawing at the roots of the tree. They tried to chase it away, but its lair is so deep underground that they couldn't even get to it. And if this continues, even the sturdy Yggdrasil will perish, even though it was still 200 years away. The guy felt uneasy, and he thought about the fact that this legend had been invented for a reason. But the problem was that the goddess guardian of the tree, the great wolf Fenrir, was howling continuously. Ashto didn't know what he meant, and a howl was heard outside the doors of the house. That was exactly what the elder was telling him. She howled as if she was trying to say that she was a worthless keeper if she couldn't chase that monster away. And it was like this absolutely every night, and the elves could barely stand it. The hero could only deeply sympathize with them. The hero thought of the monster that lived underground right under the great tree, and if they just dug it out, they would do more damage to the roots than this monster. In fact, it was that much more of a problem. Ashto tried to find some sort of solution and apologized to the elder. He opened his grimoire, recalling that it definitely said that. The boy asked the elder's permission to deal with this monster. He seemed to know what could help them. As he got closer to the tree, the hero marveled at the fact that it seemed even bigger from here. It would be great if he had more time to study it, but he had to deal with the monster first. Lowering his head, the guy saw the paws of a certain creature. A huge she-wolf lay right in front of him, and Elmina walked over to it, saying hello to the Fenrir. The she-wolf told the girl that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. Based on everything, the guy realized that right in front of him was the great she-wolf Fenrir. She looked incredibly fluffy, and the guy really wanted to pet her. The mere thought made his face turn red. Elrin noticed that the she-wolf had pups, and the Fenrir replied that they wore her out every day. Fenrir noticed the lad, and Elrin introduced her to the mayor of the village where she and their other villagers lived. The she-wolf stood up to get a closer look at the lad, and Ashto greeted her uncertainly. As Elrin realized, the Fenrir were in trouble. They had heard that some monster had taken up residence in the roots of the Yggdrasil, and the Fenrir confirmed her hunch. And the she-wolf could do nothing about it, and she was very discouraged by it. With those words, she lay down tiredly on the ground, and the elfess asked her not to worry, for they were here to help her. She asked Ashto to get to work, and the hero took a couple of steps forward. He decided to see with the help of the grimoire what could be done about it. If any plant needed help, one could use this spell. One had to convert his mana into a powerful repellent and let it soak into the ground. It would work against an underground pest, and it should have worked even if the monster was underground. Ashto took a deep breath and decided to give it a try. He raised his magic wand and used the blood of Mana. Fenrir wondered what it was, and her ears perked up. Smelling the horrifying odor, the Fenrir turned around and ran away, saying that it stinks terribly. Ashto was surprised at this reaction and didn't understand what was wrong. No one present understood what the matter was, and the guy assumed that it only worked on magical beasts. He decided to continue and started dripping Mana blood onto the ground under the tree. Things were quiet for a while, and the hero wondered if it would work. At some point, all present felt a powerful shaking, and Ashto tried to understand where the noise was coming from. Right in front of the heroes there was a hole in the ground, from where a huge centipede crawled out. The monster looked quite large, but by all appearances it was injured. Ashto noticed fluid from its eyes and surmised that the creature was crying. Galbolt realized that there was a millipede in the roots of the tree and decided to deal with it further on his own. But the hero asked him not to do so, for there was something wrong here. The book said that all the creatures living in the forest were friends. One had to take advantage of this to have a nice conversation with whomever he wanted, and the hero used his magic wand. Ashto used magic on himself, hoping it worked. The centipede screamed that her eyes were stinging madly and didn't understand why it had to go straight into her. Besides, the stuff stank horribly, and now Ashto understood her. The hero called out to the centipede, trying to strike up a conversation with it. The hero surmised that it was the one that had been devouring the roots of the Yggdrasil, and the creature was surprised that the man understood it. The hero asked it to stop chewing the roots of the tree, for it was causing the high elves much trouble. Centipede thought it was impossible and didn't understand how an ordinary human could understand it. But that wasn't the problem now, and the guy asked her to just stop harming the roots. He took a promise from the monster that he would stop or else he would have to destroy her, and the centipede apologized. That was great if the monster really understood him. The hero told the elder that he had taken a promise from the monster that he would not harm the roots again. The hero wondered why he needed to gnaw on the roots of the Yggdrasil in the first place. The reason was simple, and the centipede just wanted to eat. Everyone else didn't understand what was going on and thought that the hero might have been talking to this monster. Yggdrasil was quite rich in mana, so the centipede thought that he would lose a little from it. And that creepy Fenrir wouldn't get him if he burrowed deeper into the trees. Based on his story, the centipede fed on mana. The monster explained to the lad that the mana was very tasty, but he fed on almost anything. Although in the past few days, the forest was in a complete mess and even he could barely hunt here. The guy thought about the fact that if the creature was an omnivore, he might be satisfied with fruit. Centipede was surprised to hear about the fruit and admitted he hadn't eaten it in hundreds of years. Here in the forest there was a fierce competition for fruit, and a weakling like him could never get them. The hero didn't even know this and was surprised that the monster called himself a weakling. Ashto ended up telling everyone else that the centipede would work for them in their village, and Elrin couldn't believe the guy was saying it seriously. The centipede promised Sir Ashto to work hard. The guy smiled at the boys and said he was pretty nice. But if he said so, Sherry decided to agree with her brother. The hero didn't recognize his name yet, and the monster replied that he was usually called the Royal Millipede. In that case, Ashto decided to call him Millipede, and he was pleased to meet him. The creature promised that he would never forget his kindness and was surprised that the hero had given him a nickname. Ashto noticed the liquid from his eyes and asked him not to cry. When all the problems were solved, the lad thanked the Dikbek elder for everything. He hoped that the relationship between their villages would work out well, and the old man hoped so too. Dikbek could never have thought that the hero would be able to save Yggdrasil and tame the beast that had harmed him. But it all happened spontaneously. The elder recognized that the lad was indeed a very capable mayor and would like to give him a single plant. It was an Yggdrasil sapling that had sprouted where it had absorbed mana into the ground. It seemed that the Yggdrasil in this way wanted to thank the hero for his help. The old man asked to take care of him already in his village. Ashto accepted the gift and thanked the elder for everything. Suddenly the boy saw a Fenrir puppy under his feet, which looked at the hero with interest. Fenrir asked him to take her puppy with him, for Yggdrasil needed a guardian spirit to grow. Ashto could not make this decision, but the puppy clung with his teeth to his clothes. Apparently it had chosen him as its master, and the Fenrir begged him to agree. The hero took the puppy in his arms with a smile and agreed. When all the goods were packed, the hero gave the MANHWA its first task and asked if it was ready for it. The creature asked them to hold on tight and rushed forward at full speed. The old man looked after the boys and thought that this boy was always unpredictable. He had never imagined that he would see so many new things at his age. In the end, the mission for the hero ended in great success and change. When the centipede arrived in town, the rest of the villagers couldn't understand what was going on. They were extremely surprised to see such a creature here. The protagonists spent 4 days traveling, but they managed to shorten the distance. Muti and Diamdi were happy to see Ashto and the others return. Seeing the strange creature, Diamdi immediately drew his weapon, but the guy asked him to wait a bit. The hero explained that the creature was with them and asked them not to do anything to it. Muti became ill, and Sylvia tried to bring her to her senses. A centipede noticed baskets of fruit near her and asked permission to eat them. The hero smiled and said it was his reward for bringing them back. Ashto was also willing to feed him every day if he would work in the village. Feet compared this place to heaven if he could eat like this every day. The children welcomed the new creature to the village. The children were especially interested in him, that they examined the creature with interest. Apparently the villagers liked him. The hero smiled, thinking that everything would be alright. The Plurple's job was mainly transport. He was responsible for traveling between their village and the High Elves' village. They sent them alcohol and fruit every 10 days in exchange for medicinal herbs and books. Ashto was surprised at how many good and useful books the elves delivered to them. Elrin told the hero that her grandfather loved to write and had about 800,000 books in his warehouse. She noticed a book in the guy's hands and decided that this novel was either a story of otherworldly reincarnation or otherworldly warriors with cheater skills. The number of books in the warehouse exceeded what the hero could fit in his house, so he immediately ordered the construction of a library. In the village, another new resident performed well besides the millipede. Sherry noticed that he had grown noticeably due to the effect of encouraging growth. Ashto greeted his new keeper by name Shiro and noticed that he had been standing by the tree all day. The wolf sniffed his master's sleeve and was apparently pleased to see him. The hero thought that even if he had let him in, he would have immediately jumped out and come running here. Perhaps it was habit. The hero looked in the grimoire and read about the great tree of Yggdrasil. It said its branches were one of the ingredients for the elixir. It came third after the leaves of Orlatum and Mandrake. The hero decided he needed the material, but he wasn't sure he wanted to break a branch. It was as if Shiro understood him and climbed up the tree. Ashto noticed the animal's strange behavior and asked him what was the matter. The wolf cub came down to the ground and handed the lad a branch, for which Ashto was grateful. On this branch was a fruit, which surprised the hero, and he thought of the fact that the Yggdrasil also bears fruit. The fruit was like an apple of yellow or golden color. It was small, but did not appear unripe. But since the Shiro brought this fruit, Ashto thought that it could be eaten. Sherry thought the idea was a good one and she suggested that she eat it and not tell anyone about it. The hero suggested that the girls rest and sit down. At home, they cut the fruit into slices and placed them in a plate. After tasting the miracle fruit, the hero noticed that it was very tasty and the fruit was something like honey. Sherry and Moody agreed with him. It was sweeter and more sour than ordinary apples. Definitely one apple was not enough for them. They wanted more. After the heroes took a breather, they headed onwards. Each time Ashto looked at the village from afar, he saw more buildings. On the way, they met Elmina and May. The elven girl was happy to see them, and they had been seeing him outside a lot lately. Elmina teased the guy and said that he was no longer a hermit, but the hero asked her to stop saying that. Apparently the girls had finished with the harvest of the vineyard and Elmina said that they had come to pray to Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil was a sacred tree to them. In addition, the other high elves also often prayed under this tree, and if they prayed to it, it could bear the fruit of life. The hero didn't understand what she meant, and the elf woman said that it was just an elven legend. As it turned out, the Yggdrasil only bore fruit once and the girl had never seen it, but it was said to be a small fruit similar to an apple. Moody, Shelley, and Ashto were ready to fall through the ground. The elves couldn't figure out what was wrong, for all three of them were sweating like crazy. Sherry wanted to know what would happen if one ate this fruit. Elmina exclaimed that the fruit of life is also known as the fruit of long life, and she also heard that those who eat it will live forever. It was hard to believe that this was actually true. Afterwards, the hero told Shelley everything and it became clear to her that they had eaten the fruit of the Yggdrasil. The guy was only worried about whether they would be alright. The girl smiled and congratulated him. Shelley said that henceforth the hero had transcended man and had become a higher entity. She narrated that once long ago elves ate the same fruit and higher elves were born, and he had reached a new level of human potential. But there was no need to worry about that, because his life expectancy was no longer than that of a high elf. The girl licked her lips at the thought that his body would slowly age so that he would always remain young. And all of this could be caused by just one fruit. The high elves had known about their longevity since they were born, but humans weren't ready or able to live that long. The hero regretted bringing the girls into this, and he should have been more careful. Ashto went up to his sister and sincerely apologized to her, but the girl didn't understand why. She saw nothing wrong in it at all, which puzzled her brother. Sherry looked at Moody. She was in complete agreement with her. Moody also thought that there was nothing wrong with living longer. Sherry assumed that they were the only ones in this village who lived the longest. Longer life expectancy just meant that they would be able to spend more time with everyone, and boy did they wonder. Eventually he had to agree, and so they opened a new door in human history. The hero started to feel a little better and decided that there was nothing wrong with it. It was surprisingly easy. Shelley smiled and said that the high elf girls were ready to eat him themselves in case. Guy was sure that they would be happy if they let them know about it. But apparently the influence of Yggdrasil didn't end there, and next time everyone would be in for a big mess. The elves were amused that the heroes ate the fruit of the Yggdrasil that found the Shiro, and now their animal guardian can live with them for a very long time. The leader of the dwarves, August, thought that was wonderful. Silmeria also said that the entire Silver Cat clan would serve them for many more years. Even though they had surpassed the humans, it seemed to the hero that everyone took it too lightly somehow. In the face of the Yggdrasil miracle, the village continued to work at its usual pace, but it was unknown what was happening outside. A few days passed and the hero woke up under the tree. With a tired yawn, he looked at the Fenrir, who was busy doing something. Suddenly a woman's voice was heard, asking the beast not to come here. The boy noticed little girls with wings that looked like real fairies. The hero did not understand what was happening, and the girls asked him not to stand there and help them. Ashto called Shiro over to him and stroked his head. The girls looked out from under the branches of the trees, hoping that the Fenrir was not chasing them anymore. The boy hoped they had calmed down, and one of the fairies flew up to Ashto. She smiled and thanked him for saving them. They didn't know what would have happened to them if it hadn't been for him. They were very scared and it seemed that the Fenrir would eat them. But Ashto knew that Shiro would never do that and decided to find out from the girls who they were. But as one could guess, they were flower fairies. The boy wondered and decided that he had never heard of them. They were always on the lookout for good mana, and this time they found a tree that was full of mana. They eventually decided to move here, but they didn't expect to find a small Fenrir here. The hero surmised that they were attracted to the Yggdrasil. One of the fairies touched the hero's finger and realized that he had something to do with this tree, but Ashto didn't know what she meant. He planted and grew this tree and the fairy exclaimed that she knew it. She thought she could taste the same mana from it as from the tree, but the hero again understood nothing. Basically, if they wanted to live in the tree, the hero didn't mind. It was quite not a quiet place and there were many people living here. The fairies were excited and were already looking forward to it. The fairy smiled and asked to be called Philharmonica. She said hello by shaking her finger Ashto and the hero introduced himself. But the years passed and the mana of Yggdrasil began to fade, so the flower fairies left in search of better mana. Elmina and the others said that they used to live in Yggdrasil in a village of higher elves and she hadn't seen them in such numbers in a long time. Although they mainly fed on mana, they only needed to absorb it from the Yggdrasil tree once every 10 days, and they could eat other foods as they wished. The dwarf thought about the fact that if they wanted to live in a village, they needed to build houses in the form of real tiny houses, and Lara wanted to make them bedding and pillows. And just like that, in a few days the treetops were filled with fairy houses. As usual, everyone quickly got used to them. The fairies thanked the hero for being so kind to them, and Ashto replied that they were kind to everyone. By the way, the Phil was always by the hero's side, and the lad asked if she was sure that she did not want to go to the Yggdrasil. But the fairy was sure of it, besides she was absorbing mana from the Ashto. His mana had a special depth and was simply delightful to the Phil. A few more days later, the framework for the library building that Ashto wanted appeared. He had asked that it be made contentedly large, so he was looking forward to seeing its construction completed. The leader of the dwarves apologized and told the chief that it would take a little more time, but the guy didn't see it as a problem and didn't rush them anywhere. But since Ashto had asked them to do it, they wanted to do it in the best possible way. Regarding the work, August was grateful for the help of the Silver Cat clan. They were physically strong and worked hard, but he felt bad that they had girls helping them. They also did housework and cooking. August felt that they worked too hard. No matter how hardworking the members of the Silver Cat clan were, there was a limit to everything. In addition, lately, they had been going to the infirmary more and more often with injuries. They helped on the farm, helping to clear the area, and the guy remembered that they also helped with the cloth. They had a lot of work to do and the hero suggested that the dwarves ask someone else for help. But as it turned out, they didn't have even a dozen people from the Hellhound tribe and they were all busy clearing the area. Ashto hung his nose, remembering that the demonic ogres also had something to do. August apologized for the disturbance, but it was a problem and they would like more people. Ashto thought sadly that human strength could not be augmented by magic. A human silhouette appeared not far from the village and was interested in the large amount of delicious mana. The man thought that such a tree could make them great, and it could be a real prize for all their labors. As it turned out, the flower fairies had another kind of gratitude. Looking at the small jars of liquid, the hero decided to ask the Phyla what it was. The fairy replied that it was their thanks for mana. It was the nectar of the flower fairies, which was a special syrup and only the flower fairies knew how to make it. According to the Phyla, it was incredibly sweet and delicious. Ashto decided to try it and open the jar. Dipping his finger, he tasted the nectar, which was quite thick and dense but slid down his throat easily. There was a strange sweetness to it that lingered for a long time. The fairy explained that the syrup was made from nectar and berries processed by their mana. It could be spread on bread or biscuits and a gourmet sweet was ready. It could also be mixed with alcohol and any wine was turned into the nectar of the flower fairies and it was marvelous. The hero took the jar in his hands and thought of Muti, who in all likelihood would be delighted. To his surprise, when he added the flower fairy's nectar to alcohol, just as she said, it turned into the most beautiful nectar, regardless of whether it was wine or spruce. Guy wondered how it worked. Also, the nectar went great with bread and the girls were in total agreement. Muti thought it was delicious on bread and pastries, but it was also fun to make up sweets using this syrup. The fairy was pleased that everyone liked it and Ashto thanked her for the gift. Elrin ran in to see them and was happy to see Ashto here. She told the boy that trouble had come to them. There was some strange group outside and Ashto went out to meet them to see what was the matter. A tall horned fellow came out to meet him and wanted to talk to the village headman. Ashto wanted to know with whom he had the honor and the tall man asked him not to worry, for he did not want to eat him. As it turned out, he had heard about this village from an old friend of his and had come to see what it was all about. But if that was what they wanted, the hero offered to give them a tour and the man patted him on the back, not understanding why the guy was so uptight. He smiled and asked him to relax. The tall man laughed and Sherry wondered who he was. He didn't look like a bad guy and the hero squinted at the guest. As usual, Shelly sneaked up behind the hero unnoticed and asked him not to molest her Ashto. She called the man by the name of Vulcan and the guest greeted the girl. Vulcan told her that he had come to play with her and the girl noticed that he was just as hot and horny. Sherry and Ashto looked closely at them and began to notice something. Sherry asked his name once more and the man introduced himself as Vulcan, meaning fire dragon. He was pleased to meet Ashto. The heroes eventually made their way to the bar where they clinked glasses and decided to drink to the bottom. Vulcan thought it was cool that they had a whole banquet hall here, and the other accompanying lizards were in complete agreement with the leader. It seemed to the boy that they were lizards, non-humans. They were a unique species with a different anatomy from beasts, and perhaps that was all he knew about them. Though it was none of his business, Ashto noticed that they were lined up in a row. Vulcan asked not to worry about it, for they were his disciples who followed the hierarchy. Shelly decided to ask Vulcan what brought them here and the dragon replied that he would like to ask her for a favor, more specifically Ashto. He had recently developed an itch and hadn't had a hot bath in tens of thousands of years, which Ashto was shocked about. Therefore, he would like a guy to take care of these guys while he takes a bath. Ashto of course didn't mind and the Vulcan put his hands on the hero's shoulders saying that he could be relied on. Ashto became uneasy and Shella grinned as she watched them from the sidelines. In that case Ashto wanted to escort him to the bath and the volcano said he would return in about 2,000 years. Hearing this, the hero was at a loss for words. The guy didn't understand how such a thing was possible, and the Shella decided that Ashto was unaware of it. As it turned out, if one dug deep enough into the ground in this world he could find a very, very slimy stream of flaming wood. Vulcan used it as a bath, and there was no other bath suitable for him. Vulcan suggested that Sherry take a bath with him, but the girl refused. Sherry said he would burn in there, and apparently it was too much even for the hero. Vulcan turned to his men and told them that from now on they were at Ash's disposal and asked them to behave reasonably. The lizards obediently agreed with their boss. Vulcan left the clawed lizard in charge and the latter wished his boss a good bath. Lining up in a column, they made a respectful farewell bow to Vulcan. The man left the bar and told Ashto that they would see each other in 2,000 years. The hero had no time to reply as he covered his face against the strong wind. The volcano turned into a dragon and then flew away. Seeing his disappearing silhouette, Jeroy was thrilled that this uncle turned out to be a truly legendary dragon. Her brother understood perfectly what she was feeling. The rare species blessed by the tribe dragon volcano was called Skalenka, and thus their tribe temporarily joined the village. And because of this the problem of labor shortage was successfully solved. The dragons helped the dwarves who supervised their construction. It seemed too convenient to the lad, besides they would stay with them for a long time. The dragon tribe called Ashto uncle and thanked him for his labor, but the hero did not understand why they called him uncle. One of the dwarves brought the lad a dainty pot and said he had done what he asked. The hero thanked Mr. Radovan heartily, and the dwarf replied that he could make the pot in a moment. But he had lived for over 9,000 years and this was the first time he had ever been asked for something like this. He had never made a pot from orichalcum before. He was referring to the legendary orichalcum ore. It was a super rare ore that boasted a hardness and magic absorption ability incomparable to Damascus ore. The dwarf wondered how the hero came to possess such a rare ore. Before the boy could answer, a mole appeared not far from them. He crawled out of the ground and was glad that he had finally reached the place. Ashto and Radovan looked at the mole, not understanding who it was and what it was doing here. But then August came up to them, who apparently recognized the mole by the name of Ponta. The mole spoke and was happy to see August. He said he had missed him and inquired about his life. The leader of the gnomes asked permission to introduce Ponta of the Black Mole tribe to them. He had helped him a lot in his homeland earlier and the mole extended his hand to the lad, wishing him a good day. The hero shook his paw in surprise, introducing himself as the mayor of the village named Ashto. The mole recognized him and said he was the mayor he had heard so much about. In fact, he turned out to be mild and pleasant, which the mole was glad of. He decided that he crawled out just in time because he had one request for him. He had heard rumors that this village had very good alcohol, so the mole wanted him to trade with their tribe. The hero didn't know what to answer because this was the first time he had ever been offered to trade with them. Apparently the moles were drinkers and the gnome explained to the lad that the black moles were excellent miners. But this they decided to discuss a little later. The protagonists sat down at the table and the boy offered the mole something tasty to drink. Of course, they were ready to name their price and Elrin realized that apparently the most valuable thing in their tribe was ore. That was indeed true, but the moles could provide them with anything. The dwarf explained to the hero that they had mines nearby, but there was no time to work on them when their main job was construction. The lad was surprised to learn that there was a mine somewhere out there. In that case, the mole offered to invite his staff to that village to help. Silmeria thought this was a good idea, for black moles were well-known experts. They softened the soil and knew exactly what condition it was in, so they could help them farm. The mole drenched himself in color and admitted that he was embarrassed to be praised like that. The elfess thought it was rather cute. The lad thought that apparently everyone would like the mole and offered to elaborate further on all the Mr. Ponts. The mole was pleased that everything was settled and shook hands with the Ashto. After much discussion, it was decided that the village would receive 20 black moles. They would work in the village as miners and farmers and send home liquor once every 30 days. Of course, the black moles in the village could drink as much as he liked. In addition to working in the village, they send them rare ores from their homeland, and the mole provided the hero with a list of ores that could be mined from them. As expected, the soil itself was different from the village, and so all the ores they had were rare. They even had orichalcum, and the guy remembered that the pot needed to make the elixir required orichalcum. The hero was excited about another ingredient he had found for elixirs. The fairy decided to ask Ashto what was the matter, but the lad decided to keep silent. Ashto smiled and told Mr. Ponta that they were a pleasure to deal with, and the mole reciprocated. The hero asked for a good pot of orichalcum to be made for him, which arrived immediately. He seems to have said already that he wanted them to use the surplus for the village. The lad noticed a magnificent shiny sword in the gnome's hands and decided to find out what it was. The dwarf called it the sword of the rainbow god and confessed that he had not made anything of such high quality for a long time. He had no doubt that this item could become a national treasure. He held out the weapon to the hero and asked him to take it in his hands. But Ashto was a wizard, not a warrior, in which case the dwarf offered to hang it on the wall as a token of gratitude from the elder dwarves. The hero was surprised and thought he should thank them, but the dwarf asked him not to freak out and to accept the gift now. The lad immediately grabbed his sword and covered himself in sweat. The boy walked back home and sighed heavily. Putting the book on the table, he couldn't understand why being treated well had scared him so much. At any rate, he now had 4 ingredients for the elixir. The materials for the elixir included mandrake, orlon leaf, philosopher's stone, unicorn horn, ancient dragon scales, branches of a large tree, and an orichalcum pot. There were only 4 ingredients left, and judging by their material names, the guy felt that this was going to be quite the challenge. Though he thought about the fact that he wouldn't be able to get the other ingredients. He was sure that in his long life, he would come across them sooner or later. The hero laid down on his bed and decided that he had a long time ahead of him. Not only did they have to make an elixir, but on top of that they had a library of books from the elf village. The village was getting bigger and bigger, so it was time to decide which of them would represent and what they would do. They had many more things to do, and the boy was looking forward to it. While the hero was flying his thoughts, the door opened and Silmeria apologized to the Lord. She gave notice that he had a visitor, but he was unfamiliar to her, and she thought it was one of the newcomers. It also seemed to the maid that he was in a strange mood. They were waiting for the hero at the entrance of the village, and this was the first time such a thing had happened to him. But the hero decided that whatever race they were, he was ready for anything. On the way, the lad met Norma and Kirinji that they were happy to see the Lord. They told the hero that a suspicious type was standing at the entrance to the village, and it was apparently the same guest. The lad asked the Kirinji not to say anything like that about the first person he met. Suddenly, the voice of a stranger was heard who was pleased to meet the village headman. An elegant man with a beard and mustache bowed in respect and said he was pleased to meet Ashto. But then the hero thought to himself that this was suspicious. The man apologized for being late and introduced himself as Dimitri the demon trader. He was madly pleased to meet Ashto. The demon merchant seemed increasingly suspicious of Ashto, and the man walked round the hero from all sides, scrutinizing him like a figure. He thought there was a rather interesting odor emanating from the hero. Eventually, he decided to get straight to the point, but he was interrupted by Ashto, asking Norma and Kirinji to escort him back. The demon trader didn't understand why these kids were so fussy. The demon tried to change the hero's mind by observing that he was refusing a merchant who had traveled a long way without even talking to him. Ashto replied that he seemed suspicious, but the demon did not understand what was suspicious about him. He was just an ordinary kind merchant and offered to look into his clear eyes. For a moment, Ashto decided to believe him, but looking at the demon's stupid grinning face, he immediately changed his mind. The boy turned away and said he was definitely leaving now, and the ogres tried to escort the suspicious demon out of the village. Kirinji clung to the demon and told him to stay away from their village. The hero recalled that they sometimes came to the Estrella's house. The ogres at that moment tried to escort the intrusive guest out, asking him to leave immediately. A fairy flew up to the tired Ashto and offered him a snack, to which the lad agreed. A commotion was heard in the background of their conversation. The demon asked the ogres to let him go and didn't understand why they were so strong. The ogres ordered him to be quiet and get out of here. Meanwhile, the mole tasted Muty's biscuits, which were quite tasty. The girl was glad he liked it, and the Ponto would like to thank her somehow for the treat. He offered to give her some rare ore, but the girl didn't want it. Jewelry was a waste of time to her, but she needed a hug, and the Muty gladly embraced the surprise Ponto that served as her toy. After the dodgy demon trader, they received great healing in the form of warmth and soft fluff. The boy looked grimly at the tear-wet eyes of the demon who peered out from behind the bars. He couldn't understand how the ogres had done it and watched the picture of the children dragging the caged merchant somewhere. The girl said that he gave up at first and pretended to leave, but then tried to sneak out of the woods. Norma wondered what the guy would say to that and suggested just drowning him in the river, but the hero thought that was a bad idea. The demon tried to prove that he just came on business to the fastest growing village, and they wanted to kick him out without even listening because he looked suspicious. The trader realized how real people act and started protesting. The character thought about the fact that he called himself a demon merchant, but the merchant didn't see anything suspicious about it because he was a rare dark demon. He called himself the favorite race of the night dragon Nixon, the mythical seventh dragon that brought darkness to this world, and doubting him was tantamount to doubting the dragon. The demon tried once again to escape the cage, and the hero sighed heavily. He was in such despair that the hero even felt sorry for him and decided to listen to him. The demon was madly happy about it, and the guy thought that if he called representatives of other races, it would be even more difficult, deciding to listen to him alone. Ashto asked Kirinji and Norma to let him out. The heroes walked to the reception mansion that had just been built, and the guy never thought his first use would be like this. The demon trader exclaimed that it was simply marvelous. As expected from the elder dwarves, they were called legendary masters, and the Silver Cat clan was also here. The demon was excited and he found it interesting. Norma squinted at him and asked the hero not to worry. Ashto noticed that the demon didn't look like a serious merchant as he went through the merchandise. The demon put on his glasses and said that he hadn't seen such fine wares in a long time. He looked at the guy with a terrifying grin and decided that they would definitely befriend him. The hero grudgingly handed him the sheets of paper and agreed. In that case, the demon merchant thought they had a deal and said that the guy was a pleasure to deal with. The hero was only glad, and the demon wanted to talk about the building for the branch. The merchant handed the guy a parchment and asked if it was possible to ask the elder dwarves to build it using these blueprints. The hero looked at the blueprints and was confident that they would succeed. Ashto remarked that they were very well prepared, and the demon replied that it was simply that all the branches should be built according to the same template. It was more efficient for them to have a single space to transmit magic and a single way to store supplies, and Ashto surmised that this was true. The demon trader decided that they had a lot of things to prepare and snapped his fingers and wished Ashto-san well. After that, he immediately disappeared. He cast the spell again without reading it. The hero thought that the dark demon tribe was well versed in magic, but Kirinji still wasn't sure if they could trust him. But the hero thought that so far everything was fine. Kirinji asked for a reason why he should trust him, but to be honest, Ashto was a bit skeptical himself. But if they had a chance that he would be useful to the village, the hero decided to trust him. Besides, if he wanted to deceive them, he wouldn't tell them everything the first time they met. Kirinji frowned at Ashto, deciding that was rather optimistic. The guy thought the guys were hungry and held out the remaining sliced fruit to them, offering them a taste. He decided that he had a lot to prepare for, so a demon peddler appeared in the village, bringing with him a draft and leaving behind a suspicious breeze. The hero stood over the shop sign of Dimitri's house and remembered that he still hadn't decided what to name his village. The demon's shop was about to open, and all but his smile raised no questions. The dark demon was in awe of the elder dwarves' building technology. After all, it was simply impossible to construct a building of this magnitude in such a short period of time. It was amazing for them to once again observe all of this. The merchant took out a box as if out of nowhere and asked Ashto-san to accept it. The hero wondered what it was and looked at the box with amazement. According to the demon, it was a sprout of a rare medicinal herb from the neighborhood of Beelzebub. He had heard that the hero was a kind of herbalist, so he had prepared this as compensation for the construction costs. It seemed that the demon was able to surprise the hero. By the way, the demon had a few more requests for him, and the guy decided to listen to him. The merchant would like to demonstrate his wares to the villagers soon. He was afraid that the people were too wary and wouldn't accept his flyers. But with a smile like his, it didn't seem strange to Ashto. The demon asked the guy to ask the villagers to come and see the shop. The hero didn't mind and asked what exactly he had prepared for the demonstration. They brought a few goods that they felt their village needed. The demon offered to take a look at one item for the lad, and the hero thought it might be very useful. Gradually, people of different races began to gather outside the demon merchant's trading house. The dwarves had come here at the mayor's call, but they didn't understand what this dubious demon was up to. The dark demon smirked strangely and motioned for them to begin, then snapped his fingers. The demon was overjoyed and thanked everyone for gathering here today. The demon said that he was from Beelzebub City and introduced himself as Dimitri the Demon Trader. The leader of the Hellhounds didn't realize what was wrong with his voice, and he became uneasy. Meanwhile, Ashto was gloomily watching everyone from the sidelines. Dimitri asked for love and pity for his assistant and manager of this branch named Elizabeth. The girl was just as strange, and a demonic cheeky grin appeared on her face. Everyone present became uncomfortable with their grin, and the demon suggested to get down to business. Dimitri said that he had set up shop in this village because he wanted to benefit from their skills and the fruits of their labor. Of course, they had prepared a suitable fee for it, and all their goods would surely become useful to them. The dwarves looked at each other, not realizing what it could be, since they practically produced everything themselves. The demon trader asked the humans not to be so sure of that and to look at their goods first. The people didn't understand what it was, so the demon introduced them to the weapons. More precisely, it was not a weapon but a revolutionary product that could help them. First, one had to press at a certain place to pull out a magazine and load a nail into it. Then you had to aim. Dimitri asked Elizabeth to fetch his board and continued his demonstration. Now one had to aim at the wooden board and pull the trigger, and then something amazing happened. And as people had already realized, it was a magic tool with which anyone could easily hammer nails, and it was also called a nailer. They could use it to drive a nail into wood in an instant, and of course it was faster than hammering everything with a hammer. It was also sturdy and easy to handle, which only caused convenience. Dimitri was pleased that the nailer had made such a stirring impression on people. After the colorful demonstration, he decided to move on to the next product. It had a sleek shape, and if people felt difficulty in extracting wood, they could use a chainsaw. With it, they wouldn't even need an axe, and everything was done in a flash. With these words, Dimitri cut the log and showed it to the dwarves. He assured them that with these two goods, their efficiency would definitely increase 10 or even 20 times. This time, they were offering these two products for free as a thank you for establishing their branch, and the dwarves gladly accepted these amazing products. The demon asked them not to be shy and drop by. Moreover, they also had many products that are suitable for other races as well, and decided to introduce them one by one. A smile appeared on the hero's face as he noticed the interest of the audience. By the end of the demonstration, the demon thanked the guy for his cooperation. Dimitri said it was a great advert for them, and the hero agreed that everyone was impressed, but he still didn't understand some of the points. He was a little worried at first, but apparently Dimitri was a good salesman. All the goods here could be exchanged for goods from the village. Of course, goods needed by the whole village could also be exchanged by individuals. They could also place orders with them, so Dimitri suggested that the hero contact them if he needed anything. He could go to them at any time, and the hero thought it would be very helpful. Eventually, everyone in the village agreed, and things were going better than the lad had anticipated. He smiled and said that he would send them 10 bottles of Seth to celebrate the opening. The demon merchant smiled with his sharp teeth, telling the lad that he was very generous. He shook hands with the hero, offering once again to build a strong long-term relationship with him from now on. Thus, Dimitri's shop was successfully accepted by the villagers. With the convenience of goods, the development of the village went faster and faster every day, and the library was soon to be finished. At the same time, Dimitri's arrival in the village brought them more problems, but that was another story. Sherry glanced over to Dimitri, determined to make sure that his shop really did have everything. The demon smiled, saying that they had a wide selection of goods for every race, age, and gender. They had food and other luxuries, books, cooking and exercise equipment, mobility aids, and so on. They also had toys for babies that were suitable for all ages and kinds, as well as children's clothing, educational toys, and other baby care products. This all made a deep impression on Sherry. In addition, the demon said that they had goods that could fix their personal lives, but the guy covered Sherry's eyes and thought it was just awful. He asked Dimitri not to say anything else. The trading shop really did have everything they needed, and if the heroes happened to be in the neighborhood, they had to be sure to look there. Almana had been super enthusiastic lately, and of course the reason was known. She called out to Ashto, who was immersed in his thoughts. The girl clung to the guy who was trying not to pay any attention to her, and no one realized what was happening to them. Almana wanted to say something to him, but the hero asked her to be quiet. It was already clear to him that the elven woman wanted to ask him something, and the girl offered to drink some more, but the hero flatly refused. The girl begged him and wanted to get her hands on at least one bottle. There was a rule that everyone got an equal share of alcohol and other luxuries on payday. The elven girls on the outside were not surprised by this. Knowing the almana, it was a real pity to them. The hero replied to her that it was her own fault for drinking all at once. He didn't understand how it was possible to drink a month's worth of alcohol in a day. The girl blushed and said that they had quite tasty alcohol, and naturally she wanted to drink it to no end. As a matter of fact, she had once been banished from a high elf village for drinking all of the chief's alcohol supply, and Ashto couldn't forget it. Either way, it was not good, and it was unfair to give the almana more when everyone got the same. The girl begged to give her some, but the boy asked to put himself in his shoes. The answer was only one. The elvish girl decided to let her charm go to work and hinted that she was willing to do a lot for a bottle, but the guy was adamantly opposed. He replied that she would have to wait until the next payday, but the girl clung to the guy's jacket, saying that she couldn't do that. She didn't want to live in a world where she couldn't drink and eat chocolate. She meant the delicious chocolate that was sold at Dimitri's house and sobbed. It was a sweet made from cacao fruit grown in Beelzebub. Elizabeth said it was one of the most popular items in Dimitri's shop. The boy had tasted it once and agreed that it was delicious. Recalling that everyone ate it for dessert, Elmina burst into tears even more. The hero suggested that she exchange it with someone, but the girl had nothing to exchange. In that case, she could make something. For me and her friends exchanged various wooden amulets. The girl frowned and said that she had already made a few. The girl took out one of her figurines and confessed that her amulets were not amulets at all, but a real curse. The guys had told her never to trade them again, and apparently there really was no demand for such a thing. The guy could understand them, for it was like the truest monster. Emina would love to have the chocolate, but she had nothing to exchange it for and no one would give it to her. She found it hard to believe that she didn't deserve alcohol for her efforts, and the hero said she thought she did. While they were talking, Ashto spotted Maya with her friends. The boys were happy to meet the Lord and ran up to them. The children were overly happy and the lad decided to find out what was the matter. Maya showed him 3 bars of chocolate and told him she had changed it. The elfess seemed to be mad and tried to find out from the guys how and where they were able to exchange it. She looked pretty scary and the kids said she was scaring them. Lara replied that they were all collecting nuts together. The fairies and others helped them and they collected lots of nuts and then brought them back and traded them. Maya bragged about how much chocolate they got. The guy was delighted and said it was great. They all tried very hard. The boys wanted to eat it with everyone else and when they ate it, they wanted to take a nap. The hero thought it was great that they knew how to share with others. Listening to them, Elmina got really depressed. The boys said goodbye to the Lord, after which they ran away. The Elmina burst into tears even more, not understanding why they could eat chocolate and she couldn't, but the hero didn't know what she was talking about at all. The guy decided he'd had enough and headed towards home, but the Elmina wasn't about to let him go. As she heard, the guys were exchanging nuts for chocolate, but the hero did not care about this. In that case, the girl decided to collect nuts too and her eyes shone. The guy wished her luck but the elf girl asked to go along with her. Ashto didn't understand at all why it had to be him. The elven girl thought that they would find the very trees if they walked along such winding paths. It seemed to her that it was more interesting to walk on a path that no one had ever walked on before and maybe there was something down there. She thought the guy must have understood her. But the hero remembered that it had been many hours since she had said that and he did not think that there were trees in such a dark place that could bear fruit or nuts. The girl pointed her finger at him and told him to stop complaining and looking. That way he too could get his share and Ashto pawn. Thinking of the nuts being very tough, the girl wondered if they could hide under the leaves. But if the wood elf couldn't find them, then Ashto couldn't find them at all. Passing by another tree, the hero was attracted by some noise. But he was interrupted by Elmina, who asked Ashto to take a look at it. Looking at the berry she had found, the lad recognized that it was pretty good. They were black pomegranate berries, which were rare to find even in a high elf village. In the end, the heroes hit the jackpot, which meant they could go home. The elfess was ecstatic at the mere thought that the chocolate would now be hers, when suddenly she was showered head to toe with an incomprehensible slime. Ashto couldn't figure out what it was. From all appearances it could have been the slime that was eating people and the hero asked Elmina to wait a bit. The guy in a hurry took out a grimoire and a magic wand. He read that it was a slime that eats clothes, a special kind of slime that liked pretty girls and if they fell into its net, there was no escaping disaster. The clothes were melting and it looked quite erotic and the weakness was fire. The hero didn't quite know what it meant, but his core was very valuable and it would be best to keep it. Elmina was in great danger, but Ashto was almost incapable of using offensive magic, much less fire magic. The boy surmised that there might be with another outlet for the Emerald Dragoness's Grimoire of Knowledge. There was another way, but using this method would bring about the end of the world. He was creating a tree that would suck the lives out of everything in existence and all but one girl and man would die. So one had to be careful. The boy thought that in this case they would be like Adam and Eve. The hero couldn't stand it and threw the book on the ground, not understanding what the story was about. To him, the explanation seemed to make no sense at all. The elfess felt that she had almost no clothes left on and needed to do something urgently. The hero picked up the book again and read that it was possible to suck up their roots as soon as possible. The guy used his magic and said that he could suck up anything. He used the magic of sucking up the roots and the girl started to free herself from the slime. Eventually she fell to the ground and Ashto decided to make sure she was okay. The hero lifted Elmina, who was not breathing, and assumed she had drowned in the slime. Behind them was a sly Shelley and said they would have to give her mouth-to-mouth breathing. The hero, as usual, was surprised at her appearance, but the girl asked not to be so surprised. Apparently she was pleased with herself and begged Ashto do something that would help her. Speaking as an instructor, she asked her to pinch her nose and tilt her head and then breathe air into it. Ashto blushed, unwilling to do so, and with difficulty approached Elmina's lips. No sooner had he rendered assistance than the girl herself spat out into him all the mucus that had accumulated inside her. Elmina was out of breath and said she felt very ill. She was surprised to see Mrs. Shella here, who smiled at her and said she looked fine. The girl thought she was going to die and she wondered what that slime was. At some point she felt uncomfortable and her gaze fell down. Shella said she was lucky she didn't drown. But the pixie immediately forgot her problem. She realized she was naked and her screams could be heard throughout the forest. The hero received an undeserved slap and turned away. The elven woman asked not to look at her with that look, for any man would be surprised to find himself naked, and Ashto agreed. Elmina's tears flowed, for the fruit of the black pomegranate had been crushed. But she had nearly died, and she was lucky that the slug had confined itself to her clothes. Still, the hero wanted to show her something and offered to look at the core of that slime. He picked up the core from the ground and threw it into the girl's hands. Although they had lost the berries, but the hero had heard that the core was also very valuable and surely they could get a lot of chocolate for it. The elfess was delighted and thanked the guy. By the way, the shell was able to evaporate as quickly as it appeared, but Ashto was even happy about it. Elmina was about to return to the village and change the core as suddenly realized that she could not walk barefoot on the ground. The hero offered to carry her in that case. The elven girl was surprised, but the guy could not let her walk barefoot through the forest and silently took the girl on his back. Elmina apologized for disturbing her, but the hero didn't hear anything and asked to repeat. The girl lowered her head and decided to remain silent, saying that she had said nothing. At this time, a strange and frightening laughter was heard from the house of the demon merchants. Elizabeth put on her round glasses at the sight of the core and said that it was quite unusual. The girl realized that it was a core of slime eating clothes, and the hero was surprised that she was able to determine this just by looking at it. But she could do it with glasses enchanted with evaluation magic. The guy thought that this magic was rather strange, and he decided that it was their national characteristic. Elizabeth replied that they were quite popular in Beelzebub and it was not surprising that people reacted that way. When the girl finished her assessment, she put the core of slime on a napkin. In the first place, if they wanted to exchange it for chocolate, they could get 200 pieces, so Elizabeth suggested that they go ahead with the exchange. The elfess was delighted that they could get as much as 200 pieces for it. By the way, Elizabeth remembered that Miss Elmina had said earlier that she liked to drink, so she had something for the girl. Elmina could trade the slime nucleus for black blood, one of their best liquors. It was hard to find even in Beelzebub due to its limited production. The girl grabbed the box to get a closer look at it and couldn't believe it was true. But the demon replied that it was. She was faced with the choice of taking the chocolate or the liquor, but for the hero here was the obvious choice. Elizabeth waited for the girl's answer. Elmina slapped the table and then made a choice in favor of chocolate. Ashto didn't expect this at all and opened his mouth in surprise. Elizabeth immediately warned that it would not be returnable or exchangeable and made sure of Elmina's choice. The girl was 100% sure and asked for chocolate. The hero decided to also make sure of it and approached the elven girl. She was certainly sorry, but she decided to keep it until next time. She handed the hero a bar of chocolate and suggested they go. She had previously promised him a share and suggested they eat together. Elizabeth looked coldly at the heroes and warned them that they were not to drink or eat in their shop. The demon trader remembered something and said that tomorrow the Lord would come to see them. She wanted to know if Ashto would have time to meet Dimitri. Ashto had no idea what he needed this time. The next day came and Dimitri thanked the hero for his time. The guy had heard that he needed something, and it was true. Dimitri apologized for disturbing him and suggested that it was wrong to talk business on an empty stomach. He asked Elizabeth to prepare their drinks. Elizabeth brought them a drink and the hero hesitantly took a mug with a strange drink. Dimitri explained that the drink was called Kofi. As it turned out, it was a well-known drink in Beelzebub. It was similar to tea, which people liked very much and the hero decided to try. No sooner had he taken a sip than he spit out the contents right into Dimitri's face. The guy turned pale and told Dimitri that he had tricked him. The demon trader asked him to relax, for the drink was bitter. Elizabeth approached Ashto and explained that this drink was surprising at first, but then it was addictive. It also tasted better with milk and sugar. A certain bitterness surprised Ashto, but if savored it became more delicious. It became more mellow and was easier to drink. Dimitri thought that was good and smiled. This Kofi had the effect of suppressing drowsiness. It was perfect for clearing the taste of sweet treats from your mouth, and it was also great for keeping you awake while reading. The hero could agree with this, plus he felt invigorated that he couldn't even sleep a wink now. The hero couldn't understand if they were really selling this coffee or if they needed raw materials. The demon replied that they were just planning to sell it at the trading shop and suggested that they get straight to the point. Dimitri became serious and said that he had a more important request for Ashto. Surprisingly, the demon merchant was as serious as ever and the hero couldn't guess what he wanted. While Ashto and Dimitri were seriously discussing important matters, Elizabeth stood lazily behind the counter. Placing a mug of drink on a saucer, the guy inquired what the request was. The demon asked to hire one of their men as an employee. The hero was surprised, for this request was as simple as possible, but it was all that Demetrius needed and Ashto frowned. He thought that Dimitri would ask for something more, but that was not the case at all. The demon would like them to place 4 more people in the village. He had heard that a library would be opened soon. It would be used to store the large number of books that Ashto-san owned. It was so, and the High Elf village regularly sent them large quantities of books. The hero thought that there were about more than 20,000 books there now, and that was more than Dimitri had expected. His people were very interested in this collection, and when the library was complete, Dimitri would want them to accept his librarians. Of course, they would be completely subservient to the hero, so he could use them as he saw fit. The guy decided to make sure that they were talking specifically about the library. The hero was really curious about how to manage it after the construction was completed. Ashto was just looking for someone who could help them and thanked Dimitri, saying that he would organize accommodation for them immediately. The demon trader bowed to the hero and thanked him. By the way, the guy wondered what race they would be, and Dimitri smiled, saying that they would certainly be demons. Dimitri could vouch for their skills and was sure they would be Ashto very useful. Remembering the creepy faces and smirks of the demon merchants, the hero somehow wasn't sure that everything would be fine. The next day, a group of girls in business suits arrived in the village. They were pleased to meet Mr. Ashto and thanked him for allowing them to move to their village and work here. The guy was shocked at their decent appearance, and the girls introduced themselves by their names Agrat, Maharat, Aishat, and Zesnam. All as one, the girls expressed their joy of meeting the gentleman. Dimitri warned that, of course, at first glance it would be hard to tell them apart, but the lad saw no difference in them at all. Still, Dimitri said that there was a sure way in determining them. Agrat loved romance novels, Maharet liked biographies, and Aishat liked fiction, and Zesnam loved comic books. It wasn't a bad way of determining by preference, but it all seemed rather dubious to the hero. He wished he knew how to tell them apart faster, and the demon wondered. It was easy for him, for he thought that if you looked closely at them, it was obvious. To begin with, the merchant asked them to put on their name tags, and once they got used to it, they could match names to faces. The guy sighed heavily. He didn't think anyone normal would come, but there was no way he expected to see twins here. Dimitri smiled and said he would leave the rest to Elizabeth. In parting, the demon asked Mr. Ashto to take care of his daughters and took him at his word. The hero even forgot what he wanted to talk to him about when he heard that they were his daughters. In the end, to the guy's surprise, they were able to finish the library a few days ago. It was a huge 10-story building. It had a massive bookshelf holding 10,000 books per floor. Considering that the Royal Library of the Big Balog Kingdom held about 30,000 books, this library was simply huge. In addition, the reading space is carefully designed, and some floors have places to drink, so one could also relax here. It was definitely the largest building in the village so far, and now all that was left was to move the books there. The leader of the dwarves, August, asked how many books they had. They had about 20,000, and the hero hoped that they had a normal floor because it was quite a lot, though it was not for him to talk about it. The girls came up behind the guy and asked Mr. Ashto to provide it for them. The demon twins wanted to take their first job as a librarian and promised to do it right. 10 days passed and the lad was quite impressed, for all the genres were clearly categorized into shelves. The headman of the village of the Elder Elves decided to visit the library himself and was impressed by its appearance. Ashto was pleased to see the headman arrive and welcomed him to their library. The Dikbek headman thanked the hero for inviting him to celebrate the completion of their library. He thought the library was simply magnificent, and he was pleased to see it completed. The hero said that he also kept all the books he had given him in this library, and the Dikbek was impressed by this. In addition, the headman noticed that all the books were sorted by genre and took one of the books. He was touched that his books, which no one had ever paid attention to in the High Elf village, now stood in such fine condition. The lad remembered that he had written most of them and turned to Mr. Dikbek. He said that if Dikbek was going to send them more books, they would like to know what genres they would be. The Dikbek rejoiced and replied that there were many more. Now he promised to come here every day and bring more books, and the hero agreed, thanking the headman. By the way, Ashto wondered how the 4 twins managed to figure everything out so quickly, but it was easy for them. They checked the contents of every book, but there were over 20,000 of them. The library was finally filled and the days were quiet. But Ashto was not the only one busy with his research. The boy stirred the flask and decided that the 3 herbs mixed together had a detoxifying effect and revitalizing effect. The effect was definitely better than the potions on the market, and for that, the 4 sisters could be thanked for sorting through the books. So the hero found some books on medicinal herbs that helped him in his research. During his research, Mrs. Silmeria came by and brought Ashto tea. The lad thanked her for her help. The hero took a mug and noticed that there was a different kind of tea today, and the girl asked if he liked that kind of tea. Ashto smiled and said it was less tart but tasty. Apparently, the Silver Cat tribe had been putting a lot of effort into growing tea leaves lately. The hero wondered how the same tea leaves could have different flavors depending on the processing. Ashto remembered something and said that he had apparently seen some information about tea in a book on medicinal herbs, and Silmeria decided to make sure that this was true. It was, and the guy decided to show them around and then they would go to the library together. Silmeria smiled at the hero and was happy to accompany him. Actually, that was what they had built it for, and they needed to rest and enjoy reading. Suddenly, Shelly appeared in the window opposite Ashto and told the guy that they had an emergency. It was so unexpected that Ashto's tea ended up on the floor. The boy looked at Shelly and did not understand where she was in such a hurry. Besides, it was unclear to him what the emergency was. Shella smiled and said it was about the children and turned her head back. Opposite the Ashto house was a large tree under which a girl and a child were lying. Their clothes were stained with blood and they were apparently unconscious. Shella explained that they had been attacked by gargoyles and the guy thought they were badly injured. He decided to attend to this now and asked Silmeria to boil some water. The lads carried the injured into the house and the lad took off his jacket. Ashto noticed the shape of horns on their heads that resembled a dragon. The hero had seen them before, but thought they needed to be healed first. By this time, Silmeria had already brought the boy water and the hero thanked her for her help. He moistened the terry towels with water and pressed them against the wounds. The hero asked them to be patient and hold on for a while, promising that it would stop soon. Then Ashto treated their wounds with a brush that was in a special medicine. Now all that was needed was to bandage the wounds and they were done. Now the hero only needed to mix the herbal decoction that they had prepared earlier with the monster liver powder. They needed to dissolve it in hot water and apply it to the skin. Shella was pleased and told the guy that he had done a great job. However, it was always possible to lose a lot of blood in such a case. Ashto took another close look at the injured people and couldn't recall exactly where he had seen them. If these people were dragons, then they had to be residents of the Dragon Lord Kingdom. Speaking of Dragon Lords, it seemed that a messenger had come to the Big Balagan a few years ago, but they were humans. Then Ashto recalled that the girls had horns that were very much like these. The boy thought about it and remembered that the messenger was also the royal sisters. While he was remembering, Shelly asked the hero to look after them while she was away and Ashto agreed. Ashto's memories cleared up a little and he wondered if she was really a girl named Lorelei. At this time, in the great castle that was on the high ground of the city, the form of a man with horns sat at the throne. The man clutched at the throne and, remembering Lorelei, flooded with bitter tears and shouted her name. A female silhouette approached him and asked him to shut up and be quiet. But the man didn't understand how it was possible to be silent in such a case. She had never been so late coming home from a regular walk before, and the girl with the horns figured it was indeed a little late. Besides, Clarabelle was with her, but there had been no news from them and apparently something had happened. The girl suggested that they might have gone to Oberstein, but the man thought that was absurd. Lorelei was with her and she is going to such a magical place. A girl interrupted a hysterical man and asked him to keep it down. He hoped they would be alright and the girl replied that they would have to increase the number of search parties and go to Oberstein to look for them. Her partner immediately perked up and replied that it was the right decision. The girl poked him in the forehead with her finger and told him that he would stay home. After all, the man was the king of Garland from the kingdom of the Dragon Lords. It was not proper for a king to be away from home, but he disagreed. The girl smiled and told him not to worry, for she too was a dragon. She thought that they would not be detained by the demons of Oberstein, but the silhouette behind her said that it was not necessary. The girl couldn't make out what that faint voice was and turned her head. She saw the Shella who smiled and told her that her daughters were in her possession. It turned out that the Shella was behind all this trouble, and it was unclear what relationship bound the Ashto and the two patients together. The dragons were quite surprised to see Mistress Marshallego here. It had been a long time since they had seen her, and Shelley noticed that Almeria and Gar had grown. Earlier, she had said that she had their daughters, but they Almeria and Har did not understand what that meant. The king ran up to Shella and fell to his knees before her, begging her not to let his daughters die. Shella smiled wryly and said that if they wanted their daughters back, they would have to start with a nice cup of tea. Almeria asked for an end to this farce and an explanation. Shella decided to put the jokes aside and said that they had had an accident. The king clutched his head, but Shella calmed him down and told him not to worry as they were in the village where they were safe and sound. Almeria offered to take them to the village and Shella agreed on the condition that they remain calm. She was going to explain everything to them, but first she would like to have a nice cup of tea with them. Almeria and Gar looked at each other and decided to honor this request. At this time, one of the girls began to come to her senses and opened her eyes and looked out the window. The hero was glad that she woke up and the girl was surprised that she was still alive. She immediately jumped up from her seat, asking where the Clarabelle was. The guy asked her to calm down and said she was sleeping next to her. They got help and now everything was fine. This was certainly great, and Ashto realized that the other girl's name was Clarabelle. He decided to make sure that the girl who had spoken to him was called Lorelei. She was the sister who had come to the Estrella family with a messenger and was in the palace greenhouse. The girl recalled a fellow named Ashto. The lad was embarrassed and covered his face with his hand. It was a long story about why they were in Oberstein, and the hero told her that they were still talking. Lorelei didn't understand why he was looking away from her, but at some point she looked down at herself and realized that she was wearing nothing but bandages. Ashto handed her a hot drink and offered her a drink. The girl took the cup and smiled at the pleasant smell. The hero said that it was a medicine to regain strength and replenish blood loss. It had a pleasant taste even though it was a medicine. Lorelei smiled and asked Ashto to look at it. He had first met her about 5 years ago. He had been desperate when he discovered that he had magical abilities to the elements of nature. Then he studied hard to become worthy of the general's family. He studied pharmacology with the royal apothecary and qualified. The hero went to the royal greenhouse every day and studied hard, and then he saw nothing else. Then Clarabelle and Lorelei came from the Dragon Lord to the Great Balog. The girl remembered being attracted by the scent of sweet herbs. A boy his age who paid such attention to plants and was also diligently scribbling something on parchment. When she heard that he was the son of an Estrella family, a family famous for battle mages, she couldn't believe it. Back then, he always looked like he had little free time and had changed a lot since then. The hero smiled and agreed with that. He had been through a lot in that time. Lorelei smiled and decided to enjoy listening to his story. But now the guy wanted her to rest a little and would like to hear why they had come here. The girl remembered that at first she and Clarabelle were going to take a walk on the cliffs near the kingdom. She and Clarabelle disguised themselves as dragons and picked fruit, also flying over the water. The boy thought it was their speciality of reincarnation that only royalty had. They're beautiful people. The girl had a bird's eye view of the Oberstein, but then she was hit in the wing. After she fell to the ground, she remembered nothing more. The gargoyle took her by surprise and she fell to the ground. Lorelei already thought she was going to die when Marshmallow came to their aid. It was truly a disaster, and if she had been paying attention, Clarabelle would not have had to go through all of this. The hero asked the girl not to be too hard on herself. As it turned out, they were both fine, and anyway, they needed to rest now. The hero stroked the crying Lorelai's head and the girl thanked him for his help. Ashto brought her a basket of clothes and asked her to dress Clarabelle while she was still lying down. Silmeria had gone home and he could not do so. After a while, Clarabelle came to her senses and, seeing her sister before her, embraced her. Lorelei cried with joy that Clarabelle was awake. Her back was still a little sore, but she was cheered up by the fact that her wings would still grow back. Lorelei stroked the girl's head and said that she should thank Marshmallow and Ashto for helping. At this time, Ashto came into the room. He was glad to see that Clarabelle was already awake. The girl was just in shock, asking the guy what he was doing in the Oberstein and not in the Big Balog. Lairelia asked Clarabelle not to shout like that, for everyone could have gone deaf. By the way, she had the loudest voice in the palace greenhouse, and the girl laughed. The elixir of high elves and dragon fortitude. Guy thought it would take them at least 3 days to fully heal, but they recovered in a day. The regenerative abilities of wings and dragons were truly amazing for an Ashto. While the guy was examining the Lorelei, she was embarrassed and told Ashto that he was a pervert. They were already feeling much better, but just in case, the hero asked to stay in the village for a few more days. Even though they had not been here long, but Lorelei was glad to be here. Clarabelle was thrilled that her brother had built such a village. She wanted to explore the place and asked to show them around, and the hero reminded her that he had not built it alone. Lorelei also wanted to explore the village and asked Clarabelle to take her with her. Her sister hoped she was alright, and Clarabelle compared it to a milk tooth falling out. The hero felt embarrassed that it was somehow mundane for them. The girl took the hero's hand and said that they were fine. In that case, the guy decided to take them out for a walk. The girls were delighted at the sight of such a beautiful village and said that it was very nice here. They had no idea that such a nice village had been built in Oberstein, which is called the Wilderness. But it turned out to be quite ordinary to the hero. Ashto told him that the older dwarves were in charge of all the construction. They were especially careful about what they did. Lorelei had heard of this, but it was still an extraordinary engineering feat for her. She surmised that the little houses they saw on the branches of the tree were birdhouses. But a fairy flew out of the house and took an interest in the girls. She thought they were friends of Ashto, and Clarabelle was delighted to meet a real fairy. It was as if the girl went crazy and shouted to her sister to look at the real fairy, and the little creature asked her not to try to catch her. Lorelei became embarrassed and asked her sister to stop. Still, she was surprised, for she didn't think fairies actually existed. The hero replied to her that they were also called flower fairies, which meant that these little houses belonged to them and there were about 30 of them in the village. They collected honey in the forest and made a special syrup. Clarabelle's eyes lit up when she heard about fairy syrup. She asked the fairy to share it with her, for she would love to taste her syrup. But the fairy was not going to give it to the girl who tried to grab her, and Clarabelle promised not to chase her again. Then they walked to the sewing factory where the hellhounds made clothes, bags, trinkets, and all sorts of other things. Lorelei was quite curious, for she had never seen clothes being made before. They were met in the workshop by a mutie that she was glad to see them. She was worried about their well-being and asked if they were allowed to walk. Lorelei smiled and said that she was fully recovered. Mutie thought that was great, since just yesterday she hadn't looked well. The hero wondered what Mutie was doing here, and the girl said she was thinking about her new design. She was able to concentrate better here than at home, and the boy understood. Clarabelle looked at the girl sullenly and thought Mutie was dating her brother. Lorelei became uncomfortable and asked her to stop. In any case, just walking around the village like this, one was amazed at how many different kinds of races there were. Dwarves, silver cats, of which there were very few, but Lorelei had seen them on the Dragon Road as well, but flower fairies, hellhounds, and demonic ogres and salamanders were a bit surprising at first. The girl thought at first that it was the custom of some tribe to keep stuffed animals in the village, but the lad explained that it was a Molpont of the Blackmore tribe. Lorelei was shocked that he was also a local, and the lad replied that here nearby was their farm. The girl marveled at its size, and the lad said that farming was the main industry in their village. There were vineyards and orchards as well as wheat fields and tea plantations, and the big building nearby was a processing plant where alcohol was mainly made. All the villagers liked to drink, so they were very enthusiastic about it, and the girl thought it was pretty great. They also had a cotton field for making clothes and a farm a little further down the road, but it was smaller than this one. Lorelei agreed that they had a very well-developed production. What they lacked they made up for in trade and with the elven villages and Black Murians, as well as bartering with the shop. The girl was surprised that there was a shop here and wondered who ran it. The hero remembered the demon Dimitri's acerbic and terrifying smirk and decided that was a different story. Ashto also decided to show the girl the bathhouse and the library, but then suddenly the wood called him and the guy said that he was helping on the farm. They picked some delicious grapes and the girl thought it was quite nice. Clarabelle liked the creature and asked her brother who it was. The hero replied that it was a gardener and from Lemon. It looked like a creature that he had made with magic, and Lorelei thought it was a very cute baby. Clarabelle decided that in that case the boy was her mum, but the hero would rather be daddy. Lorelei was delighted and said that this village was very nice. She was sure that here he, the muties, and others were having a good time. It seemed to her that it was a cause for pride to make Oberstein such a peaceful place. Guy said that through everyone's work they had accomplished so much. The girl lit up with the idea of also helping this village and decided to talk to her father about it when she got home. Clarabelle was saddened when she learnt that they were leaving soon, for she wanted to spend more time with her brother. Thinking about it, she accidentally crushed the poor wood. The sister tried to explain to the girl that their parents would be worried if they did not return home. The hero offered to walk her back to the village, and when she was allowed, she could come by the safe road whenever she wanted. But then someone interrupted them and said that she wouldn't even have time to miss her. Ashto was surprised when he saw the Shella on a huge centipede. The girl thanked the Amnoshka for the ride and next time decided to ask her to take her to the Dragon Lord instead of just to the village. Apparently he had never been there yet. Shella said that their father was a little worried, so she wanted to let them know that they were alright. She gave the girls a letter from their parents. She also held out a letter to Ashto, saying that there was something for him too. Clarabelle said that the letter belonged to Lorelei, and the girl made sure it was really from her father. Lorelei was happy that her father had allowed them to stay here for a while, and apparently he had said hello in the letter to Ashto. But it said that they could stay if the Shella allowed them, and Ashto wondered how the Shella was related to the Dragon Lord. The boy turned his head and noticed that the girls had already run away. But suddenly a Clarabelle came at him and asked his little brother to take care of them. The hero looked at the letter and saw that there was something else there. The request for them to come home was crossed out. Instead, there was an inscription for him not to worry because she would not burn them. The hero became uneasy and covered in sweat. Meanwhile, the girls decided that the library would be a lot of fun. Thus, the sisters from the dragon people decided to move to the village from an overabundance of parental love. The protagonists reached the largest building in the village, by far, which was the library. It had only recently been built, and Ashto said that the bookshelves were still a bit sparse. The mere sight of the library made the girls excited. Lorelei had never seen such a large and beautiful library before, and Clarabelle told the hero that her sister was very fond of books. The boy recalled that when she was in the Big Balog, she went to the library almost every day. One of the demon employees was surprised to meet the mayor. She welcomed them to the library and asked what book they were looking for, but the hero said that he had come here to show his guests what they had. He assumed that the agrat in front of her, but he was wrong. A girl like her came up behind them and thanked the mayor for his work. Ashto assumed that he was an Aishit, but again he was wrong. Ashto was completely confused and Clarabelle wanted to know who the girls were. One of the workers came up to them and told the agrat and Aishit that it was not good to make fun of the mayor. In addition, they had previously agreed not to remove their name tags. Clarabelle was shocked that there were more of them, but Ashto reassured her by telling her that they were 4 sisters. The girls didn't expect to be unraveled so quickly and they felt sorry as they wanted to play with him some more. The girls greeted the mayor once more and introduced themselves by their real names, saying that he had been right earlier. Clarabelle clucked at her sister who was reading, saying that there were 4 identical faces here. The girl decided to ask the boy if she and Clarabelle would really live in this village. They had been brought here to recover and Lorelei understood that, but it seemed unfair to her that they did nothing all day long. She asked permission to ask Ashto for something and offered to work for her in the library. Lorelei really wanted to work as a librarian and didn't understand why the guy was so surprised. But the hero meant that now there would be 5 librarians. The demon girls were happy and were willing to accept another assistant. The twin sister offered one of them to be their leader and become their head librarian. The girls approached Miss Lorelei and introduced themselves as the sisters that served as librarians. They all greeted her together at the main library building. The sisters bowed and were delighted to meet their new head librarian Lorelei. Lorelei was delighted, for she thought becoming head librarian was a good thing. She was also excited to meet them and hoped that they would teach her the ins and outs. Clarabelle told the guy that no one would stop her now that she was here now and Ashto didn't doubt it. The hero hung his head and decided to go to his home and the girl asked him not to be so hard on himself. Lorelei, who took over as head librarian immediately after arriving in the village, was readily accepted by the villagers and remarked how good she looked in her robe. The character could not help but think that the people of this village are very adaptable. Whoever came here, everyone was very friendly and the girls gave him many books and paintings. So a few weeks passed afterwards and the man thanked the guy for his time. Ashto asked to leave the formalities. It was quite a surprise to the hero that Mr. Grad wanted to see him. The lizard had a favor to ask of his boss and asked him to help him build a shed for molting. The guy didn't understand anything so the man decided to explain it all to him. Sitting down on the couch, he bowed his head but Ashto asked not to do so. First of all, salamanders are a species that molt regularly, and it happened about 3 or 4 times a year regardless of sex. The hero thought it was the same as in dragons and reptiles. The whole problem was the molting process, and for them to show up while molting to people was like being naked. It was generally embarrassing. During the molting process, the lizards gave off a lot of heat, and if there were combustible materials nearby, they could ignite instantly. So they couldn't just stay at home or in the shade of a tree in the middle of nowhere. They would like to build some brick huts. They would be brick barns so that they would not be afraid that they would burn. Guy saw no problem with this and offered to build a shed anywhere and of any size. They could allocate them a plot at the edge of the village and Ashto suggested that they would build them with the dwarves. But the lizard replied that the salamanders were doing it themselves. And yet, the hero did not think they would disturb the Master of August with this, so he saw nothing wrong with it. He had always thought that salamanders were too reserved. The openness and freedom of other races made them stand out even more. The hero saw nothing wrong with their hierarchy, but they had to realize that everyone was equal in the village and asked when the next molt would be. Salamander answered that in a week or 2 some of them already start molting, and in that case, Ashto decided to ask the older dwarves to do it first. The leader of the dragons couldn't let them worry so much out of them, but the lad seriously appealed to Mr. Greed and said that it was only natural and that they should build the facilities that their friends in the village needed, and if the salamanders had any problems, they would certainly help them. Plus, the hero suggested that they imagine what would happen if August found out they had built something and didn't tell him. The leader of the dwarves could easily be imagined in anger, who would probably call him a narcissistic lizard. Surely if he had seen the dilapidated hut they had built, he would have been furious. Salamander immediately went to the craftsmen to ask for their help and thanked the boss for bringing it to his attention. With this problem solved, the village became even more cohesive, but the guy thought that it wasn't exactly a hierarchy. But it didn't matter. The salamander and the hero were delighted at how quickly the older dwarves were working. The dragon leader didn't know how to thank them for building so quickly, and the dwarf suggested he start by not thanking them every second. The brick houses seemed very nice to the lad. The 2 in the front of them were for molting, and the spawning sheds were in the back. The salamanders were spawning faster than they were molting, and August suggested that they should rather call their ladies here. Ashto completely misunderstood what he meant and the dwarf surmised that the salamander had not yet told him. The dragon leader tried to explain that it was a sensitive topic, so he was going to talk about it later. As the hero realized another new life had been born in the village. Everyone got along very well with each other during harvest time, but there was one frowning mysterious girl. The boy looked at the frowning mandrake and asked her what was wrong. The girl silently stood up and walked out of the greenhouse without saying a word. She had been in a bad mood lately, and Ashto wondered what the reason was. He thought it was time for them to go home and get something to eat and looked at the woodpile. Pegleg couldn't wait until she tasted the donuts. Mandrake frowned because Arlon had been in high demand in the village lately. The special donuts were made from Arlon leaves. The mixture of fried leaves with traditional ingredients gave the flavor a surprising depth and sweetness. The special donuts were very popular, mostly with the higher elves of silver cats and wolves, but now they were being savored by salamanders and elder dwarves. The hero motioned for Mandragora to go home, but the girl turned around and silently walked away. Apparently it was envy that everyone used only Arlon leaves. Mondragon fish leaves are unsweetened, so they could not be used for sweets. Arlon leaves were sour sweet and mandrake leaves were salty sweet. The girls were worried about the mandrake, but the hero was sure it would be alright and they would do the cooking tomorrow. While the mandrake was in her room, Ashto asked her for help. Arlon called the mandrake and asked her to come down to the kitchen, where she was already waiting. The hero gathered all the ingredients and told the mandrake that he would like to try to make something tasty from her leaves. She was at home today and could help him make something. The girl was happy and hugged Ashto. He was not very good with a knife, but he had to chop the vegetables first. The girl asked to provide it to her and the hero was surprised that she could handle it. He set up a chair for her to cook in peace and made sure she was alright. Strangely enough, the girl chopped the vegetables deftly and the lad noticed that she handled the knife better than he did. She had helped the mutie earlier and the hero praised her for her good work. Ashto left her to chop the vegetables and meat and he himself decided to make a casserole. The hero took garlic from the fields and dried mandrake leaves. He just roasted them but the flavor was just wonderful. The hero was delighted at how quickly the girl had done her job and chopped everything up. According to the Marmalego grimoire, the remaining spices had to be roasted separately so they wouldn't burn. Then the chopped onions should have been added and when they were well fried, add water. Then the vegetables and meat should have been added first, followed by the roasted garlic and mandrake leaves and stewed until done. In no time everything was ready and the guy thought they were done. The hero didn't even realize at first where such a wonderful smell came from, which made him very hungry. Mandragora herself was drooling at the sight of this food. Ashto poured the dish into plates and offered the mandrake to eat. As soon as the lad tasted the dish, he exclaimed that it was very hot and yet it was very tasty. Mandragora was happy and absolutely agreed with him. The meat, vegetables, and spicy broth created an exquisite flavor. It was like a soup with meat, vegetables, and spicy broth. Donuts are great, of course, but the hero couldn't believe that the ingredients of the elixir could be used to make such a delicious soup. The girls came down to their kitchen, curious about that delicious, wonderful smell. Sherry decided to ask her brother what dish he had made this time. The boy said it was a special curry soup with mandrake leaves. They definitely had to try it as it was very tasty and decided to put it on everyone's plates. Sherry thought it was a little spicy, but it was delicious. Mutie blushed and admitted that it was addictive. Silmeria called it a real fantasy and asked to share the recipe with her. The girls asked for more and would like to eat this dish regularly. Everyone was able to shine with their skills and even the mandrake was smiling broadly thanks to the secret recipe of Ashto. Galbold once told Ashto about a spring he found when he decided to hunt elsewhere. At first he thought it was a lake, but it turned out to be a water vein and he had never seen such a large spring. His story interested the hero. Ogre said that there were big fish splashing about there and perhaps they should fish there. Ashto thought that idea seemed like a pretty good one, and so an unexpected find outside the village was discovered. From that moment on, the protagonist decided to go in search of the spring. It was simply an indispensable thing in a measured life in search of a moment by the calm waters. Sherry was thrilled when she heard about the spring. She had always wanted to eat fish and didn't know there was such a place. To Mutie, fishing in a big spring sounded like a lot of fun, and she decided to make them a meal if they all went together. Elmina noted that they would need fishing tackle, but she didn't have anything like that since they hadn't fished in a while. But the boy had already gone to find some tackle at Dimitri's shop. Lorelei would love to dive into their atmosphere, and her sister offered to go with them. In the end, almost the whole village decided to go together with Ashto, and the hero felt uncomfortable because there were too many people. The hero tried to explain that they could not all go together and they would have to wait. Ponta's mole heard about the spring and asked about it. He told how he had stopped at it on his way to this village. It was really big and beautiful, and besides the water in it was good too. The hero wondered if there was any danger there, and the mole replied that forest monsters rarely hunted at the watering hole. The hero was very fond of fishing, and if it was safe here, he thought it might be a good place for a holiday in the future. Ashto asked the Punt for help and the mole asked to rely on him. and yet the group was quite large. By the way, the hero could not see anything in front of him as he was blocked by a large ogre. The guy noticed that the Ponto would be difficult to walk, so he decided to carry him in his arms, and the mole thanked Ashto for his help. Sherry noticed that the Moody was hesitating, so she decided to ask what was wrong. Noticing her sad look, she realized that the girl also wanted in her arms and suggested that she just ask for it. Looking at the happy girls, it seemed to the hero that they were having a lot of fun. It was the first time they were going somewhere in such a big crowd. If they were going to breed, it was important for them to secure the territory, and the hero was sure they would have salamander children as well. Elmina decided to ask the Lorelei if she had ever been fishing, but the girl had never been fishing, and if she wanted to eat a fish, she just caught it and swallowed it whole. The guy and the Pona got embarrassed, and they thought it was better not to do it today. Besides, Elmina thought fishing was quite fun. She agreed to lend the girl her tackle and fish together. Lorelei thanked her and hoped for the elf's help. The dragon and the elf were fishing together, something that was probably only seen with them. Ashto asked how far away the spring was, and the mole replied that it was about 2 hours on foot, but he thought their group would reach it faster, and the hero decided that 2 hours was a long way. But it looked like everyone was having fun, so if they took their time, they wouldn't get too tired. After about 2 hours, the guys did come to a beautiful spring. The water glistened in the sunlight, and the place was full of all kinds of vegetation. The heroes thought that this place was very beautiful. The boys shouted to Ashto that this place was just huge and asked him to go faster. The guy was overcome by his own shortness of breath and didn't think about the weight of the mole. Elmina frowned at the hero and said that he was not strong enough. Ashto looked up and noticed that this place was indeed very beautiful. The springs he had seen before had a lot of algae and smelled like fish, no matter how well it was kept. But here the water and air were clean and pleasant. In that case, Clarabelle suggested that the boys spread out and have fun, but her sister disagreed with her. Clarabelle did not understand what was the matter, and Lorelei explained to her that they did not know about this place. No one could know what could happen if she accidentally turned and jumped into the water. Lorelei frightened her sister and told her that she could have been eaten. Apparently, she was able to frighten her little sister, for her mother had told her of many instances of. Lorelei only asked her sister not to dive until she was sure it was safe there, and the girl agreed. By the way, the hero remarked that she was a good teacher. While the girls were having fun, fishing and swimming, the lad enjoyed this tranquility. Moody sat down next to them on a blanket and said Ashto that she had made them lunch and offered them a snack. Suddenly, they were interrupted by an elven woman and told the boys that there was an island in the spring. When they looked closer, they saw a mysterious islet in the middle of a large lake. Indeed, it was there, but it was very far away. The boy was overcome by curiosity, and the fairy decided to fly down and see what was there, but Ashto stopped her. The lad suggested that it would be better to see it all together, and Ashto suggested that they should go by boat. The spring was incredibly large, and the hero suggested that they make them a large boat like a cruise liner. Nudie was delighted with this idea. The lad decided to inquire with Mr. Balgold about the situation around him, and at first glance, there was no threat. In that case, the hero made up his mind and decided to ask August and the others to build a ship. And once the ship was ready, they would explore this island. The girls noticed how Ashto was suddenly animated by this idea. But until then, the boy forbade the fairy to fly there alone, and the girl agreed. She still wanted to be with them. Nudie had previously sailed in small boats on small lakes, but had never been on a big ship. The big Balog was landlocked. The boys decided that as soon as they got back to the village, they would make a plan. Everyone else headed back home, and the boy heard a voice behind him for help. It was as if there was something in the water. The boy turned around at the voice calling out to him from the spring. He had a feeling that something exciting was waiting for them before they explored this island. Ashto looked at the source in surprise and thought he was imagining things.